Let's get straight into it. I won't waste your time with long introductions, like please subscribe this and that and like. These stories might seem simple at first, but if you listen closely, you'll notice something just beneath the surface, something that doesn't quite fit. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. These stories deal with space and time, how fragile they really are. Some take place out there in the cold silence between the stars. Others stay closer to home, where time bends in ways we're not meant to notice. Whether we're drifting through the void or just walking down the wrong road at the wrong hour, the rules we trust can fall apart without warning. And when they do, what's left behind doesn't always make sense. We should have left the stars alone. I once worked for NASA, an astronomer, a keeper of truths that were never meant for the public eye. Forget your conspiracies. The Earth is not flat, and no alien council pulls the strings of world governments. I wish that were the case. I desperately wish the truth were something as quaint as that. But the reality is worse, unspeakably worse. It began in 1993. The Hubble Space Telescope watched a star die. No supernova, no collapse, no fading pulse of red into silence. It was simply gone, snuffed out in minutes like a candle in the dark. Fainter than a whisper, this star was barely known, even to astronomers. Some blamed dust clouds, those lazy veils drifting through space. The report was filed, then quietly forgotten. In 2007, two more stars vanished. Not together, but separately 8 hours apart. They had been partners, bound in a binary orbit, dancing together for millions of years. But they dimmed alone one after the other, as though something had reached out and touched them, deliberately. They were closer to Earth than the one before, by about 15 light years. It was only then we began to dig, and found two others in 1995. Two Thalsos extinguished, all within the same stellar neighborhood. We stared at the data in silence. A pattern. An approach. Something was moving between the stars at almost the speed of light. We couldn't see it. We couldn't define it. We only saw the aftermath, stars reduced to lightless corpses. Hubble was too blind to see more. Then came the James Webb Space Telescope. Publicly, it was still under calibration. Privately, it had already begun observing. We pointed at the dead stars. No light. No hope. But gravity betrayed the lie. Mass remained and grew. Something still existed where the stars once shone. Worse, tendrils of substance, strange filaments, linked them. Threads of dark matter stretching like veins across space. Then we studied the closest vanishing point, the binary stars from 2007. Webb's spectrometer read the remnants. It should have revealed heat, motion, radiation. Instead, it found cold, the kind of cold you only find in the deepest void where light has never touched, and stranger still, the material composition. A few familiar ghosts: hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, magnesium. But the rest. Wrong. Unknowable. Elements that had no place on any periodic table. Wavelengths that bent the laws of matter, space, and reason. We weren't looking at matter as we understood it. We clung to a hypothesis, dust and shells. Alien megastructures, cloaking stars to harvest their energy, at rash hopeful. A fantasy, yes, but at least one rooted in intelligence. But even that broke down under scrutiny. These structures were built too fast. No machine, no fleet, no civilization could construct anything so vast in minutes. And those filaments, reaching across interstellar distances like spider silk, had no conceivable function. No science could explain them. Then came the final cruel revelation. Roughly a month ago, we detected explosions. Flashes of unclassified energy at the edge of a solar system 12 light years away. Thermonuclear, antimatter-based, and other forces. Forces that had no earthly name. We watched through the Webb's eye as something in that system fought back, a doomed resistance. Their weapons were apocalyptic by our standards, capable of scaring planets, shattering moons. They slowed the thing, delayed it, but only for a while, then silence. The flashes stopped. They had lost. We watched the system's star, waiting for it to die, and then the shadows came, not all at once. A creeping darkness. A sliver, then another, then a third. Shapes drifted across the stellar surface, pattern curved, familiar in the worst possible way. They looked like leaves. We said it aloud in disbelief. Leaves. In the frozen silence of the control room, the truth sank into our bones. It wasn't a machine. It was a plant. A cosmic parasite, ancient and infinite, spreading across the galaxy. It sought light, fed on it, found it, grew toward it. Its filaments were not cables, but vines. Its structure was not steel, but flesh. The familiar elements, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, were not a comfort. They were chlorophyll. We had found God's garden, and we were not welcome. We kept watching as the leaves merged, intertwining, blotting out the last glimmers of that distant sun. It died beneath a canopy born in darkness. And then, the whisper of doom. A junior astronomer, voice trembling, gave the final report. Another tendril is forming. Its trajectory, the sun. How long? The supervisor asked, though he already knew. The answer was a whisper, a eulogy. 27 years. When that's all we have, they had thousands of years, unimaginable technology, and still they failed. We have less than 3 decades. I'll be silenced for sharing this. It doesn't matter anymore. You deserve to know. One day, the sun will blacken. The sky will dim. A shadow will stretch across the earth. and you'll feel the cold, not the cold of winter, but the cold of extinction. And now you'll understand it wasn't a war, it wasn't a judgment, it was a harvest, and we are the fields. Air story 20 hit the as the whispering sky. I used to watch rocks. That's what I told people when they asked what I did. I track rocks. I worked in a frozen outpost near Kiruna, Sweden, monitoring near-Earth asteroids for an observatory no one remembered funding. It was dull work, predictable, comforting in its irrelevance. Dots on a screen, nothing cared about us. But that winter, something looked back. We first saw it as Object 142 Cake, a blur, a wound in the blackness moving too fast, wrong-shaped, not bound to any solar system. It cut across the void with a jet parabolic trajectory, like a blade seeking a throat. It wasn't the speed that unsettled us, it was the two voices. 142 Key was emitting structured radio signals, but they weren't technological. They weren't beeps or binary. They were low and wet, rhythmically pulsing with a kind of dash meat logic. A chant that sounded like it had teeth. The waveform danced, not in ones and zeros, but veins and rot. We ran it through every translator we had. It didn't match any known language, but somehow it felt ancient to, like something that predated sound, like something that used us to remember itself. We reported it. The European Space Agency didn't even ask questions. They replied in a single line: or seize all observations of 142, destroy all recordings, do not share. Or a courier arrived within 24 hours. Black case. No name. He walked straight to our servers and left with every copy. Except I lied. I had backups. I had to know. The signal grew louder, clearer, said Hungarian. I didn't understand the meaning, but my body did. I stopped sleeping. My teeth ached. I bled from the eyes for 2 nights. It felt like something was coiling behind my ribs, unfolding wings inside me. Then came the night the sky sang. The power was out. The observatory dark. But the sound continued, louder now. It's not from the speakers, but from the air itself. The wind moved wrong. It pulsed in time with the signal, like the atmosphere had learned to breathe. I went outside. The stars were wrong. Not gone. Not scattered, but aligned, dined, watching the constellations shifted impossibly, forming lattices, dead eyes without lids, without mercy, and then one of them said blinked it. I felt it inside my skull, like something wet had dragged its gaze across my consciousness. 2 days later, 142 Key reached the edge of the solar system. It should have kept going, but it didn't. It tech stop it. Physics broke that day. Something that fast should never stop. But it did, effortlessly, arrogantly. Itself unfolded. I don't know how to describe what we saw. What we thought was a comet or probe was only a zuddy bud. A curled sliver of something greater, something as horribly alive, blooming across folded space. It wasn't entering our dimension, it was acid digesting it, unraveling the rules, reweaving into something it could wear. It didn't move through space. And space moved through it, and then the Chevy dreams began, everywhere. Simultaneously, people across the globe began screaming in their sleep, painting the same thing. A garden of screaming mouths, stitched to vines, trying to chew through stars, a black tendrils strangling suns, flowers that bloomed in silence but screamed as they opened. After every dream ended the same way. We are the soil, we are the soul, we are the seed. My team, gone. One by one. Some ran, some changed. One gouged his own eyes out, chanting the coordinates of 142K. Another burned himself alive, carving roots into his flesh before he died. The observatory was shuttered. I never left. 142 Key is no longer an object. It's cut a wound, and it's growing. We can't see it now. It exists outside our sight line, coiled behind the stars. But some nights, the sky hums to, not from above, but beneath your thoughts, your bones. It vibrates inside your marrow. You can feel it when you're alone. When you stare too long at the dark between stars and feel it staring back. And if you listen, you'll hear it whispering your name. This wasn't discovery. It was its germination. The stars were never silent. They were waiting, biding their time in cold hunger, staring down at the fertilizer we become. And now, finally, they grow. We are the soil, and it's not already blooming inside you. Our story 3 hint, there is a room in the Pacific Ocean, deeper than any trench we've mapped, deeper than pressure should allow. It is not man-made. It predates press time. It remembers before. I was part of an international team sent by Noe and James Stifa. 3 months ago, we detected a signal, not seismic, not tectonic, a pulse low and wet, leaking from beneath the crust near the Mariana Trench. The kind of sound a throat might make if it had no mouth, only memory. It wasn't random. It was structured, intentional, biological. We called it Point Nemesis. We sent unmanned drones. They didn't crash. They rotted. Metal turned soft. Cameras filmed only blackness writhing just out of frame. And when we recovered the hulls, they shivered like they were afraid of touch. Next came the deep probes. They came back intact but erased, like they'd never been programmed. No data, no software, just hollow, breath-warm casings that hummed like something inside was sleeping. So of course they sent us. My fortis self, a biologist, alongside neurolinguist, an AI engineer, and a saturation dever named one. We weren't given orders. We were given instructions, like a ritual. At 39,000 feet, the ocean stopped behaving like water. Light failed, not dimmed, recoiled. Blackness pooled around us, heavy and wet with intention. It wasn't absence of light, it was light's corpse. Then we saw it, a pane of glass, 20 meters across, embedded perfectly in the sea. It did not reflect, it absorbed. It pulsed. It was too clean, too still, like the ocean hated but could not touch it. Beneath the glass a room, a waiting room, or something remembering one. Wallpaper bloomed with fungus that mimicked floral print. Chairs too soft, like they'd been dreamed up by something that never sat, and walls pulsing with slow, wet thought. The pulse, it came from the center. Not sound, but feeling. Like a heartbeat in reverse. Like something was pumping into us. Then the mirrors turned. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. No edges, no seams. They reflected possibilities. Not us, but what we could become if time lost its footing. I saw myself shriveled and blind, still blinking. I saw one filled with coral, trying to scream through a face that had grown gills inside out. One mirror showed me tapping, endlessly, from inside the room. Teeth shattered, fingernails down to red. We should have fled, but the sub didn't respond. The controls spun. The lights pulsed in sync with the room's breath, and then something moved behind the walls. Not fast, not violent, just inevitable. It moved like it owned the rules. It wore faces it did not understand, including mine, like trying on skin it had only read about. When it blinked, mirrors fogged. Ewan cracked. He stared into a mirror and whispered, "I've been here. I've never not been here. There was never an ocean, just the space between teeth, It's chewing." He opened the hatch. Water came in. But it didn't drown us. We drowned upward. We were inside the room, not sinking, folded into it. The glass was above now. The sub drifted above us, caught in a loop, replaying its descent forever, flickering like a tape stuck in God's throat. The linguist began to unravel. Literally. Skin unspooling in ribbons, each strip humming in languages we had no record of. One of the words sounded like my name, before it was human. The AI tech stared into a corner until his eyes bubbled. He just popped. Gun. No blood, no scream, just the sound of a page turning. Now I'm alone. The mirrors watch, but they don't reflect anymore. They listen, the walls have grown closer, they breathe. I can feel fingers in the wallpaper, testing the idea of flesh. The pulse doesn't come from the room now, it comes from me. Something is growing inside me. I etch this with what used to be my fingernails. I no longer bleed, I no longer sleep. The lights flicker and my heart beats rhythm. I dream of an eye pressed against the glass from the other side. If you're reading this, you've already heard it. The hum behind silence, the dream inside your mouth, the itch beneath your memory. I am beneath you. The ocean was never empty, it was always waiting, and now it remembers you. Your story Forithia, the route below. There is a village in northern Maine that no longer appears on maps. It once sat nestled between a crumbling forest and a lake so still it was mistaken for glass. The locals called the lake Stillmother. No one knows where the name came from, or if they ever did. By the time I got there, in late October, it was already gone. I was a folklorist. I say was because I no longer collect stories. Not after Stillmother. I was following a lead, a short, hand-scrawled letter sent to the university archive office, with no return address. It read, "The lake is not a lake. She watches from the bottom. The root is hungry again." There were coordinates, and silence. I arrived after a day's drive, passing shuttered farms and abandoned fields. When I reached the village, it wasn't empty. Not quite. The houses were wrong. They slouched like old men asleep in prayer. Shutters hung like broken limbs. Not a single light burned in any window, yet smoke curled from several chimneys as though the building still breathed. At the heart of the village was a chapel. It had no cross, no signage, just weathered stone and a door that looked carved from petrified wood. I stepped inside. The chapel was packed, every pew filled. Men and women, silent and still, facing forward. They didn't move. Their eyes were open and dry, their lips slightly parted like they were mid-prayer or mid-scream. The air was thick with mildew and rot, and beneath that something sweeter. Earthy, like overturned soil mixed with something decayed. I backed out, heart pounding, and made for the lake. Stillmother was worse than I imagined. It did not reflect the sky. It did not ripple or move at all. There were no birds, no frogs, no insects, just silence so complete that my own heartbeat felt like shouting. At the edge of the water, I found a staircase carved directly into the lake bed, descending beneath the surface. It was not old. It had no algae, no erosion. Each step was carved with symbols, spirals, roots, mouth. My flashlight began to flicker the moment I stepped onto the first stair. I walked down. The water did not resist me. I passed beneath the surface, but I did not drown. I did not feel wet. I only felt watched. The stairs ended at a door. It pulsed. The wood of it was knotted and dark, slick with something that shivered beneath my touch. I opened it. Inside was a cavern, vast and breathing. The walls were soft and damp. Not stone, never stone. Living tissue. Veins bulged along the ceiling. Roots dangled like wet hair. There was a sound, low and constant, like the exhale of some ancient sleeper. In the center of the cavern was a tree. It did not grow. It hung. Its roots reached up instead of down, clawing into the ceiling. Its trunk was smooth, fleshy, and glistened with moisture. Its leaves were eyes, thousands of them, unblinking, watching. Each one pulsed in rhythm with the breath of the cavern, and at the base of the tree was a pit, a shallow, round depression filled with bones. Human bones, arranged in spirals, pressed tight together like puzzle pieces. At the center of the spiral was a child's skull. It was fresh. I turned to leave, but the door was gone. There was no surface, no stairs, no water. Only flesh and the tree, and the knowing gaze of its many eyes. One of them opened, a large one, directly in the trunk, and something stepped out. It wore the shape of my father, but my father has been dead for 7 years. It smiled. When it spoke, the voice came from the pit, from the bones, from the tree itself. You are rootless, but you will take well to the soil. I do not remember what happened next, only that I walked inside one of the houses. The villagers were still in the chapel, still frozen, still watching something that was not there. I left the next morning, but I am not clean. My skin itches in the rain. I can hear the soil breathing at night. The mirror shows me blinking roots where my hair should be, and sometimes, when I sleep, I feel something growing beneath my back, something hungry, pushing against my spine like a seed cracking open. They will say I was lost, confused, that there is no such place. But the tree is real. The lake is not water. It is still watching. Our story, Fifi, and my uncle disappeared when I was 12 years old. His name was Ellis, and he lived alone in a cabin deep in the woods of northern Vermont. Every summer, my parents would send me to stay with him for a few weeks. He was quiet, always watching the trees like he expected something to step out from behind them. One morning he was gone. The cabin door was open. The kettle was still warm. His boots were by the hearth and his coat hung by the door. No note, no sign of struggle, just silence. The police searched for 3 days. They found nothing. I overheard one of the officers say, "It's like the forest swallowed him." They gave up, but I never did. I returned to that cabin every year on the same day, June the 16th, hoping to find something, hoping he might return. When I turned 27, I inherited the property, and I moved in permanently. That was a mistake, because last summer the woods began to move. Not the normal kind of movement, not wind in the trees or animals in the brush. The paths moved. The landmarks changed. A boulder I had used to orient myself vanished overnight. The little creek that ran by the north edge of the cabin turned south, then split into two. I walked in a straight line for 3 hours one morning and ended up behind my own house. Then came the knocking. It started around 3 o'clock each morning. Soft, deliberate taps from beneath the floorboards. Always in threes. Never louder than a breath, but enough to wake me. I pulled up the floor one night. There was nothing underneath. No crawl space, no animals. Just earth, damp and soft like something had been burrowing upward. Then I found the map. It was hidden behind a false panel in the attic, drawn in red ink on parchment so old it cracked at the edges. The map showed a place, deep in the forest, marked only by a crooked symbol, like a broken eye knot unraveling. Ellis had labeled it the Crooked Place. I followed the map. The forest resisted me. Trees leaned into my path. Roots twisted around my boots. But after hours of hiking, I found a hollow in the earth, perfectly round, with a tree growing out of the center. The tree was dead, but its bark pulsed like muscle. And around the base were footprints, Ellis's boots, sunk into the dirt as if he had stood there for a long, long time. I heard a voice behind me. "Did you bring the offering?" I turned. No one was there. The wind shifted. The tree groaned. And then I saw the hole. It had not been there before. A small tunnel at the base of the tree, just wide enough to crawl through. The air that flowed from it was warm and sore, like breath that had been held too long. I should have left. I should have run. But I crawled inside. The tunnel was wet. It pulsed. The walls squirmed beneath my hands. I moved for what felt like hours, my light growing dimmer with every inch. And then I emerged into a mirror of the world above. But wrong. The trees bent away from me. The sky was not sky at all, but a lidless eye watching. The ground was soft and spongy, like walking on rot. I heard whispers, not words but meanings, shapes of thoughts I could not form. I found Ellis there, or something that wore his shape. He stood at the edge of a pit filled with moving roots and mouths that chewed but never swallowed. His skin was translucent, and its something shifted, bones that were not his, faces pressing against the flesh from the inside. He smiled at me with too many teeth. "You came," he said. "The soil remembers blood." I tried to run, but the ground grabbed me. Roots wrapped around my legs, my chest, my throat. They did not pull me down, they pulled me inward, into memory. I saw every moment of my life, twisted, rearranged. My mother with black veins in her eyes. My father growing antlers at the dinner table. Myself, sitting in a dark room with no walls, carving my own name into the floor over and over. I screamed, and then I was outside again, in the forest, by the dead tree, covered in soil that was not soil. My hands bled from fingernails torn away. My mouth was full of dirt. I do not remember how I got back to the cabin, but the map is gone. The knocking continues, not from below now, but from the walls, the ceilings, the mirror, always at 3 o'clock. Sometimes I see Ellis in the trees, sometimes I see myself, and sometimes I wake up holding roots that were not there the night before. The crooked place is not a place. It is a hunger. and it has already opened inside me. Or story 6 in I was 11 when they built the mulch pit behind the school. It started as a composting initiative, funded by some grant none of the teachers really understood. They fenced off a patch of the old field, right where the wild grass grew in thick tangled clumps, and dumped in wheelbarrows of orange peels, rotting lunch scraps, and yard waste. At first, the smell was just bad. Then it got worse. It began to stink of things that were not food, Herr Copper. Sweet meat left too long in the sun. The principal said that was normal for decomposition, but the janitor, Mr. Clegg, refused to go near it. He was missing 3 fingers and talked to his mop bucket when he thought no one could hear. The flies came next. Big, slow things that buzzed like radios left between stations. They moved in spirals. They would cluster around children and then vanish the moment an adult came close. One girl, Marcy, swallowed one during recess. She started choking, and when the nurse made her spit it out, it was not a fly at all. It was something with too many legs and a face. The nurse quit the next day. She did not take anything from her office, just left her keys in the shape of a front desk and walked off across the field until the fog swallowed her, and then came the whispering, low at first like wind through dead leaves, but sharper, with intention. It would curl up from the mulch pit during math class. Children would stare out the window with wide eyes and bloody noses. One boy, Jordan, climbed the fence and lay down on the mulch like it was a warm bed. When they pulled him out, he was smiling with gums full of rootlets and teeth turned soft like mushrooms. After that, the teachers pretended the pit was not there. They boarded up the windows on that side of the school. They built a shed to block the view, but the whispers still got in. They started carrying over the intercom, not all the time, just between classes. A wet, clicking hush, like someone chewing dirt in syllables, and always it said the same thing, feed us, and we will forget your names. But we stopped having fire drills. We stopped having visitors. A girl transferred in from another town and ran away screaming by lunchtime. She said something was watching her from beneath the toilet seat. The janitor later found her hair braided into the pipes. The worst part came near the end of the year. A boy named Keenan, quiet, always drawing spirals on his desk, came to school one day with no shoes and dirt packed into the corners of his eyes. He walked straight to the mulch pit during morning announcements, climbed the fence, and jumped in. The ground did not crunch, it breathed. We saw it. Everyone saw it, the mulch rising and falling like lungs under damp leaves. A kind of tremor, rhythmic and wrong. When they tried to dig Keenan out, there was nothing. No bones. No clothes. Just a slick, fibrous cavity lined with rows of pale growths shaped exactly like molars. By then, the teachers were gone. They still showed up every morning, yes, but they were not the same. Their eyes were glassy and too wet. Their fingernails were packed with dirt. One began coughing up tiny sticks. Another dragged herself through the halls barefoot, whispering to the floor tiles. No one stopped us when we ran. I do not know how many kids made it out. The fog was thick and full of voices. I remember hands reaching from puddles. I remember seeing my mother standing by the fence, mouthing something I could not hear, her hair falling in long clumps, as if it had never been real. I ran until my lungs bled. Now I live far away. I never go near schools. I never plant anything. Sometimes I find mulch in my shoes in the morning, even though I sweep the floor every night. And sometimes if I turn the faucet too fast, I hear it gurgle, not like pipes, but like something remembering how to speak. And always when I sleep, I see Keenan's face beneath the leaves, grinning with teeth made of bark. The last time I checked, that school was not on any map. No one I ask remembers it. But if you go driving in the right part of the county on a foggy day, you might hear something whisper through the trees. It will not call your name, not yet. But it will ask you to feed it, and it will promise to forget you. Ere Story 7 hint, the village of Bleak Hollow no longer appears on maps, not even the old ones. You will not find it in records, or satellite images, or memories that do not already reek of rot and mildew. It is a place that resists remembrance. But I remember I was 9 when my family moved there. My father was offered a forestry job, a government contract, they said. Good money. A real chance to get back on our feet after years of bouncing between modals and debt. I remember the way his hands trembled when he signed the papers. Relief, maybe. Or something else. Bleak Hollow lay in a basin surrounded by a dense, unmarked forest. No birds sang in the trees. The leaves hung limp, like they were too tired to fall. The sun barely touched the village. The light always looked strained, as if filtered through stagnant water. The orchard was the first thing I noticed. It was enormous. Row after row of twisted apple trees all planted in precise lines. Their bark looked scorched. Apples were pale, nearly translucent, and they never fell. Not even when ripe dead, no one went near it. At school, the other children were silent about the orchard. If I asked, they stared blankly or mumbled and changed the subject. One boy, Theo, warned me once in a whisper. The trees remember. He would not elaborate. Our house was at the edge of the orchard. At night, I swear I heard the branches creaking, not with wind, but with purpose, like knuckles flexing. I saw silhouettes in the trees. Not animals. Not people either. Shapes that flickered at the edge of sight. One evening, my father came home pale and shaking. He had been assigned to clear a trail that brushed too close to the orchard. He did not say what he saw, but he stopped going to work. He boarded up the windows. He smashed the radio. He started sleeping in the hallway with an axe across his chest. My mother insisted everything was fine. The villagers are just old-fashioned, she would say, forcing a smile. But her eyes betrayed her. She stopped answering the door. She whispered to the floor when she thought I could not hear. One night, I woke to the sound of something tapping on my window. Tap, tap. The glass was fogged. But when I wiped it clean, there was no one there, just the orchard, bathed in a silver moonlight that somehow did not reach the ground. That was the first night the dreams came. I dreamed of roots bursting through floorboards, of wet soil filling my mouth, of hands made of bark clawing their way into my chest. Each morning, I would wake with bruises I could not explain and the taste of loam on my tongue. Then the villagers began disappearing. First the grocer, then a schoolteacher. Their whole families, their homes remained, but the insides changed. Walls were damp. Furniture was rotting, and the apples began appearing on doorsteps, not placed, grown. Stems fused to the wood, pulsing with a rhythm like breathing. My father nailed our doors shut and wrapped every room in chains. He stopped eating. He murmured to the axe as if it were a lover. He cried when he thought I was asleep. Then one night, he was gone. No sign of forced entry, no broken chains. Just his axe, laid gently across the foot of my bed, and a single apple on the floor, its skin stretched tight over something that shifted when I looked too closely. I told my mother we had to leave. She agreed. We packed only what we could carry. At dawn we fled, but the road out of Bleak Hollow no longer existed. The trees had grown over it. Fused bone, white trunks arching together like ribs. So we turned to the orchard. Did not look like the same place during the day. The trees stood silent and still, but the air was wrong, too thick. Every step sounded distant, like the sound was being swallowed. My mother held my hand like a vice. We ran. Then I lost her, let go, but something pulled her. She vanished in a blink, as if she had never been there. I scourged. I screamed again. No answer. Only the trees now closer, bending toward me. I ran. I ran until my lungs felt like torn paper. I ran until the orchard ended. I found a road, a highway, cars, people. I was miles from Bleak Hollow. I tried to tell them what happened, but no one believed me. They never do. They found my name in no database. My family did not exist. Bleak Hollow did not exist, but I remember, and sometimes I hear the trees, in quiet rooms. They speak now, in voices I almost recognize. They offer things. They promise I will not be alone, that I can go back. Sometimes I wake with soil in my ears. I do not know how long I can resist. If you find a place where apples grow too pale, where trees twist as if whispering secrets to the ground, do not go near them. And if you must, never listen. The trees remember, and they are still hungry. Her story, Ada, the hourglass beyond the veil, time is not a river. It is not a line. It is not a circle. It is a wound. And sometimes the wound bleeds back. I am Dr. Elsie Marrow. I was once a physicist, obsessed with the edges of reality, the thin lines between what is and what might have been. My life was a tangle of equations, blackboards, and ceaseless nights, until the day I found the hourglass. It started in a forgotten archive, buried beneath the foundations of the university. A small, brass object, ornate and oddly warm to the touch. No markings, no date. It looked ancient, yet untouched by dust or corrosion. It was an hourglass, but the sand was not sand. It was something else. Like tiny shards of light, or frozen smoke. I turned it over. At first, nothing happened. Then time stuttered. The clock on the wall jumped backward and forward. A lecture I was giving repeated itself, the same words falling from my mouth like echoes caught in a cave. My students blinked. Confused, I felt a nausea deep in my gut. That night, I dreamed of a place beyond time, a corridor endless and lined with doors. Each door led to a moment. A possibility, a memory, a future not yet born. Some doors were cracked open, whispering fragments of things I did not fully understand. Others were sealed tight, trembling with silent terror. In the dream, I walked until I found a door with my name on it. I opened it. Inside was my life, but different. Faces I knew were blurred, shifting like smoke. Events that had never happened, or that had happened but in other ways. I saw myself as a child, but older. I saw myself dead, but smiling. Then I woke. The hourglass had moved on its own, the light sand had shifted. Over the next days, I learned it did not obey normal time. It counted moments I had not lived. It tracked seconds stretched thin like spider silk. And then the hallucinations began. They were not normal visions. They felt real. I saw the corridor again. I heard the doors whisper. I saw those who had passed through. First, my mentor. He had disappeared months ago, last seen entering a forest near campus. Then my colleague, who vanished after claiming he had touched the edge. Then others, students, friends, all drawn by curiosity or madness. One night, I followed the whispers to the university basement. The hourglass was gone. In its place, a shimmering portal, like rippling water in the air. I stepped through. What I found was no place I could have imagined. The corridor from my dreams stretched before me, infinite and cold. The doors hung suspended in a void that was neither dark nor light, but something in between. I reached out and touched one door. The wood was warm and pulsing. Suddenly, the door swung open and I fell through. I landed in a street I recognized, but it was twisted. The houses were cracked, the sky was fractured, like a mirror shattered into jagged shards. Time ran sideways here. A single moment stretched into centuries, and centuries collapsed into seconds. I saw people frozen mid-motion, faces twisted in silent screams or joy. Some wore masks of normalcy, but their eyes were hollow, as if watching some unseen horror behind me. I tried to move, but the ground pulsed beneath my feet. The air smelled of rust and burning paper. I heard a voice, soft, coaxing, speaking words I could almost understand. I fled, back through the door, back into the corridor. I tried to find the portal home, but the doors changed. Some doors had grown monstrous, gaping maws of teeth and darkness. Others whispered terrible promises of freedom, of escape from time's prison. I wandered, for what felt like days, or centuries. The corridor stretched beyond memory. I began to change. My skin grew pale and thin. My shadow flickered, sometimes gone. My voice echoed unnaturally. I felt time slipping through me like sand, my memories bleeding away, replaced by strangers' faces and forgotten names. And then I found a door unlike the others. It was black as void, yet it shimmered with stars. The frame was carved with symbols that pulsed with cold fire. Above it, a phrase burned in language older than earth. Return what was taken. I hesitated. I knew that door was a trap or a promise. I stepped through. I found myself in a room that felt both vast and suffocating. A single chair faced a window showing the universe in infinite rotation, stars dying and birthing in endless cycles. On the chair sat a figure. Its face was a blur, shifting and flickering like static. Its voice was the sound of broken clocks. You took what was not yours, it said. You disturbed the flow. Now, time demands its due. I understood then that the hourglass was never mine to find. It was a seed planted by something beyond human comprehension. A test. A curse. It showed me what lay beneath reality, the raw bones of time and space, bleeding chaos and madness. It tore open the veil that keeps our world safe and made me see that all moments exist at once of past, present, future, possibility. I begged it for release. The figure smiled, a movement like the shuddering of dying stars. Release is a doorway you must build, but first you must give back what you took. I looked down at my hands. They were empty, but I felt a weight there, a shadow of something lost. I remembered the faces in the frozen street, the missing people, the moments stolen. The hourglass, it was inside me now, a hollow, atching space that no time could fill. I reached inside my chest into that void and pulled out a fragment, a shard of the light sand. The corridor shuddered. I was thrown backward, tumbling through doors and echoes and shattered time. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the basement, the hourglass whole and still on the table. But something was different. The word outside the university felt wrong. The sun hung too low in the sky, and shadows stretched in impossible directions. The air smelled of ash and memories. I looked in a mirror. My reflection blinked after I did. The wound in time had followed me back. I do not know how long I have been here, or what will happen next. The corridor waits beyond the veil, and the doors will not stop whispering. If you find the hourglass, do not turn it over. Do not listen to the whispering doors. Time does not forgive, and the wound only bleeds more. For Story 90 and I have always been fascinated by the vast emptiness of space, the way it stretches infinitely, indifferent to the tiny lives clinging to planets like ours. To me, space is not just a void. It is a dark ocean filled with secrets so ancient that they refuse to be uncovered. But nothing prepared me for what I found aboard the research vessel Erebus. I was one of the 20 crew members sent to investigate a strange signal detected beyond the orbit of Neptune. The signal was unlike anything our instruments had ever recorded. A deep, low-frequency pulse emanating from an uncharted region in the Kuiper Belt, far beyond the dwarf planets and icy debris. At first, the signal seemed rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Then it changed, shifting in pitch and pattern, as if someone or something was trying to speak. The mission was simple: locate the source, collect data, and return. We left Earth with hopeful hearts and the arrogance of explorers, convinced the universe held no terrors for us. The journey took months. The cold of deep space gnawed at the hull, and the endless black sky outside the viewport was a silent, uncaring void. 2 weeks before our arrival at the signal's source, strange things began happening. It started with the lights. Flickers in the corridors, lights dimming and brightening without cause. The artificial gravity would stutter, leaving us weightless for brief moments. Then there were the sounds, soft whispers on the intercom, static bursts that morphed into faint voices speaking in tongues none of us understood. Crew members reported nightmares, dreams of endless black fields dotted with white stars that blinked out one by one. In the dreams, they saw a figure, tall, dark, and featureless, watching from the shadows between the stars. I too was not spared. I dreamed of floating endlessly, pulled through a tunnel of shifting lights and colors. At the end of the tunnel there was a door carved from starlight. It opened silently, revealing a void deeper than any ocean, where time did not exist. When we finally reached the source, what we found was not a planet nor an asteroid, but a massive construct floating silently among the cold ice. It was a sphere, hundreds of meters in diameter, made of a black material that swallowed light. Its surface was smooth but pulsed gently, like the breathing of some colossal beast. We called it the obsidian sphere. Our sensors could not penetrate it. No radiation, no heat, no electromagnetic emissions, just the low rhythmic pulse we had tracked. We sent probes. None returned. We sent drones. They vanished into the sphere as if swallowed by the darkness itself. Then the communications began to fail. First, the messages were delayed, arriving out of order. Then they became garbled, twisted into strange patterns that resembled the pulse of the sphere. And finally, the sphere itself responded. The pulse shifted into a complex rhythm, a language of sound and silence impossible for human minds to decode. The sphere was alive, or something like life. It was watching us. Our captain, Reynolds, ordered a boarding party. We suited up and approached the sphere in a shuttle tethered by cables. The moment we touched its surface, the world changed. We passed through a membrane of darkness that was both solid and liquid. Inside was a chamber that defied physics. There was no up or down. Walls of shifting shadows surrounded us, and the air tasted like cold metal and fear. In the center was a structure, a pulsing core of light and darkness, impossible to look at directly without feeling your mind twist. Voices filled our helmets, speaking in a chorus that was both beautiful and horrifying. They told us of a time before time, of stars born and dying in the blink of an eye, of civilizations devoured by the void. They showed us visions, vast cities of glass and bone floating in space, alive and watching. They revealed the truth of the sphere. It was a collector of memories, a prison for souls lost to the cosmos. The sphere had been waiting for us. One by one, the boarding party began to change. Lieutenant Harris screamed as his body blurred and melted into the shadows. Dr. Nan vanished, replaced by a hollow shell whispering secrets of the void. Captain Reynolds went silent, his eyes black pools reflecting the starless night. I tried to run, but the sphere was everywhere. It was inside my mind, twisting my thoughts, unraveling my memories. I saw my life, a tapestry unraveling thread by thread. I was no longer sure where I ended and the sphere began. Now I am trapped within the obsidian sphere. Time flows in loops and fractures. Past, present, and future bleed into one another. The voices sing endless lullabies of stars that will never shine again. If you find this message, know this: the obsidian sphere is out there, drifting in the darkness, waiting for the next curious souls to touch its surface. And when it does, the silence beyond the void will consume you. Ere story the intent, I have to write this down before I forget who I am, before the silence swallows the last of my mind. If you find these words, then maybe you can understand what happened to us in the void beyond the star we named Asterion, the star that forgot. We left Earth 6 months ago aboard the research vessel Helios on a mission that was supposed to change our understanding of the cosmos forever. Asterion was a star unlike any other. It pulsed with irregular rhythms, and its spectrum contained strange emissions. Signals that did not match any natural or artificial phenomena recorded before. The scientific community was electrified. The chance that this was a message, a beacon, from something beyond our comprehension was intoxicating. I was the chief astrophysicist assigned to the mission. Our crew was 14, each chosen for their expertise and sanity. At least that was the plan. We arrived at Asterion after months of slow approach through cold darkness. From the first moments, something felt off. The star was dimmer than expected, its light weak and flickering as though struggling to shine. Surrounding it was a halo of dust and debris, but the debris was not natural. It was arranged in intricate, geometric patterns that shifted when observed directly, like a living mosaic. Our instruments detected a low-frequency hum emanating from the star's corona, a sound impossible to hear but impossible to ignore. It resonated in the hull, in our bones, and the spaces between our thoughts. The first to change was Dr. Ivana Petrov, our exobiologist. She became obsessed with the patterns in the dust. She spent hours staring at the swirling fragments through the observation windows, whispering to herself in a language none of us recognized. Her dreams turned into nightmares. She spoke of fractured echoes and the star's breath. One night, she vanished from her quarters without a trace, leaving only a smear of something black and oily on the floor. The log showed her last recorded message was a whisper. The star forgets us, but we remember. We searched for days. No sign, no distress signal, no explanation. Then the hull lights began to flicker in rhythmic patterns, the same pattern as the star's pulse. One by one, others started to see things. Shadows moving beyond the windows, figures standing just out of sight, the voices calling from the darkness of space. Our navigator, Captain Reynolds, insisted we leave immediately, but the ship's engines failed, as if the star itself was draining our power, tethering us to its cold, forgotten heart. I found myself drawn to the observation deck night after night. The star's pulse matched the beat of my own heart. I heard it whispering, calling, unspooling my memories like threads from a loom. I realized then that Asterion was not just a dying star. It was a trap, a memory graveyard. Every Pari atom, every photon carried fragments of forgotten souls. Entire civilizations lost to time, encoded into the dust and light. The star was alive, but not in the way we understand life. It was a collector of memories and a devourer of time. and it wanted us to join its forgotten chorus. When I write this, I do not know if anyone will ever read it. The last functioning terminal is barely alive, and I feel the edges of my consciousness fraying. The star's pulse is no longer just sound. It is a force pressing against my mind like cold water, dragging me deeper into the void. I am the last. And soon the star will forget me too. The days after Ivana's disappearance fractured whatever calm we had left. The ship's hum was no longer just background noise. It was a presence. A cold, sentient rhythm pulsing through the metal veins of the helios, beating in sync with the dying star's faint, unsteady glow. Dr. Lamp, a quantum physicist, tried to rationalize it, calling it a resonance phenomenon, some bizarre interaction between the star's exotic particles and our ship's instruments. But no explanation could quiet the feeling in my gut. Asterion was alive in a way that science had never prepared us for. Ivana's notes were the first clue to what we faced. She had been scribbling frenzied entries in a small leather-bound journal, filled with strange symbols and sketches of impossible geometries, shapes folding into themselves, fractal patterns that seemed to bleed from the pages. She wrote about the Takus beneath the light, a place where memories gathered like dust, and time folded upon itself like a broken clock. I found the last page torn out. The void was growing closer, more suffocating. That night, a storm hit the ship, not from outside but inside. The power fluctuated wildly, lights blazed then blacked out, plunging us into an abyssal darkness only broken by the trembling glow of Asterion through the observation window. We heard something else then. A low moan, or perhaps a song, weaving through the corridors. Voices layered and distant, calling in tongues that made my teeth ache. The ship's AI, which we relied on for navigation and life support, began to stutter, muttering fragments of lost languages and nonsensical coordinates. Captain Reynolds ordered a lockdown, but the doors wouldn't seal. The ship seemed to resist us. The crew was unraveling. People vanished, found themselves in places they had no memory of going to, or simply stopped responding to commands. Our linguist, Marisol, was next. She tried to decipher the patterns in the star's pulse, convinced it was a message, a warning, or perhaps a ritual. But as the star's pulse grew louder in her mind, she began to speak less and less to us and more to the walls. On the 5th day of lockdown, she vanished too. Only a whisper remained. Remember the silence before the stars. I was left alone in the observation deck, the only light the ghostly flicker of Asterion's faltering heartbeat. I looked out into the void and saw the dust patterns shifting. The star was weaving itself into a cage, and I understood. We were never meant to leave. The star was not a dying light. It was a seed, growing its roots through space and time, entwining those who came near in a web of forgotten memories and endless silence. I feel it now, the edges of my mind peeling back, unraveling into the vast black. I am both here and not here, trapped in a moment folding endlessly onto itself. The star has forgotten us, but it never forgets. It collects, it waits, and it will bloom. I no longer know how many days have passed. Time itself is frayed like an ancient tapestry, threads pulled loose by the star's insistent grasp. The Helios no longer feels like a ship, but a tomb suspended in endless black. I drift through corridors that twist impossibly, angles folding where walls once stood straight. The air is thick with a metallic scent, copper mixed with cold ash, and the silence is oppressive, broken only by the star's faint pulse, like the slow thudding of a monstrous heart. My thoughts are fragmented. Ivana's journal haunts me, and the final missing page gnaws at the edges of my memory. What was she trying to tell us before she disappeared? What did she see in the coves beneath the light? I found Marisol's personal recorder discarded in the mess hall. Her last entry was a tremulous whisper, barely audible. It sees through the cracks of time. It remembers all who have been touched. I am becoming a shadow of what I was. The star's pulse, that terrible chant in electromagnetic waves, has burrowed into my brain. At times I hear it not just in the instruments, but in the spaces between my breaths, in the hollow of my skull. Sometimes I see it in my dreams, a vast, writhing shape folded in impossible dimensions, tendrils reaching through reality like roots through soil. Faces, countless faces, pressed against translucent membranes, screaming silently. Mouths moving in slow motion, eyes wide and unblinking. But the worst part is the silence that follows, because the star does not just trap light or energy, it traps time. It folds history upon itself like a cruel origami. It remembers everything that was, everything that will be, and everyone who ever dared to witness it. The memories are a labyrinth. I found a door deep in the bowels of the ship, one I am certain was never there before. It is made of a dark, oily glass that absorbs the weak lights of my flashlight. I pressed my palm against it and felt the star's pulse. Slower, now heavier, like a heartbeat wending down. I opened it. Inside was a room filled with floating, shimmering motes of light, fragments of memory, swirling slowly in the air. I reached out, and the lights coalesced into visions. I saw myself standing at the star's edge, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream I could not hear, the ship breaking apart, consumed by an invisible force that erased it from the universe's fabric. Faces I recognized, colleagues, their expressions frozen in eternal terror. The star was devouring not just matter, but the very essence of those who encountered it. I slammed the door shut and stumbled back, gasping for breath. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with malevolent life, contracting and expanding like the lungs of some vast cosmic beast, and I realized the Helios was becoming part of the star's memory, a prison woven from space and time, where the past and future blurred and dissolved. I write this now on a salvaged datapad, my hands trembling. If anyone finds this, know that Asterion is no star. It is a seed of oblivion, a creature woven from the darkness between the stars. It weeps, and it remembers. I no longer trust my senses. The ship's corridors bleed into one another, walls breathing slow and deep as if the entire vessel were alive, pulsating in unison with Asterion's dark rhythm. The star's pulse is no longer just an external signal, it is the cadence of my own heartbeat, a slow, morbid hymn echoing behind my eyes. Time is splintered. Minutes stretch into hours that collapse into seconds, and the crew, my crew, exist now as flickering shadows trapped between moments. I found Inoch in the hydroponics bay, curled beneath the wooled leaves of alien plants long dead. His eyes were glazed and unfocused, lips moving silently in a broken chant. When I called his name, he turned slowly, a smile creeping across his face that did not reach his eyes. "Do you hear it?" he whispered, voice like cracked glass. "The song beneath the light. It's always been here, in the gaps, the spaces between stars, waiting." I wanted to shake him from this nightmare, but even as I reached out, his form shimmered, fractured, as if he were dissolving into thin air. The ship's AI, which once guided us safely across the void, now responded with hollow static and cryptic murmurs. It spoke of folding dimensions, of layers of reality peeling away like dead skin. And then the hallucinations began in earnest. I saw the star not as a distant light, but as a living eye, unblinking, infinite. From its pupils spilled streams of light like liquid memories, cascading into the abyss. Shapes emerged from those streams, vast tendrils, serpentine and shimmering with 1,000 shifting faces. One face was mine, but older, haggard, broken. It reached out, fingers stretching through the veil of space-time, beckoning me forward. I followed. I do not know how long I wandered. The ship became a labyrinth of endless halls, twisting stairways that led nowhere, doors opening into black voids filled with whispers in languages I could not comprehend. At one point, I found a room filled entirely with clocks. Hundreds of them, each ticking at its own irregular pace. Their hands spun backwards, forwards, sometimes standing still. The sound was maddening, a cacophony that tore at the edges of my sanity. The star's voice came from the center of that room, a low, melodic pulse that resonated with every tick, every talk. It sang of forgotten epochs, of civilizations consumed before they could write their stories, of a hunger older than the cosmos itself, and I understood in a terrifying flash that the star was not a light, but a devourer, consuming not just matter and energy, but time itself. Our existence, our history was being erased, folded into a cosmic nightmare where past, present, and future collided and vanished. I ran. I ran until my lungs bled and my mind shattered, but the star's pulse was inside me now, a seed planted deep in my bones. The ship, my body no longer mine. The horizon has folded. There is no escape, only the star's hungry eye, watching, waiting. I have stopped running. The corridors of the Helios have dissolved into darkness, and the star's pulse is the only sound left in my head, steady, relentless, like a heartbeat counting down to oblivion. I stand at the edge of the ship's observation deck, staring into the abyss where Asterion hangs, no longer a distant star but a vast, watching maw. The faces in the light ripple and warp, 1,000 forgotten loves trapped in the star's gaze, their histories folding into nothingness. I raise my trembling hand and touch the cold glass. The star does not blink. It is patient. It is infinite. It does not hunger for destruction, but for Ursher, for oblivion. I understand now that the star's light is a silence, the silence of everything that ever was or could be, swallowed whole and folded away into the dark. And I am its final witness. As the last flicker of my reality fades, I whisper into the void, "Remember me." But the star only pulses, unblinking and eternal, and the darkness answers. But the light must come. At least the story levens in. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of the light, an impossible shimmer on the edge of the telescope's vision, something that didn't belong. At first it looked like a star, a faint dot in the blackness. But stars do not blink. Stars do not shift shape in the corner of your eye. Stars do not echo sound. I am Dr. Linnamarlowe, astrophysicist and reluctant explorer of the darkest reaches of the universe. For years, I worked in observatories cataloging the usual pulsars, quasars, nebulas, pretty things that twinkle and spin at cosmic rhythms we have come to accept. But this was different. We called it the Whisper, an untranslatable anomaly pulsing with a rim that resembled a heartbeat, not electromagnetic waves, not radiation, something alive, or nearly so. It was as if the universe itself was breathing. It started in the Messier 42 Nebula, Orion's star nursery, a place full of new stars but free of known signals. The whisper appeared as a dim ripple, barely detectable, a distortion in the fabric of space, time itself. Our instruments picked it up first, oscillating through the wavelengths like a sigh. But soon, the crew of the deep space vessel Endeavour reported hearing it, quiet murmurs in the silence of their comms, ghostly voices just beneath the threshold of hearing. We traced the whisper moving slowly, almost with intention, toward the outskirts of the known galaxy. It defied all laws of physics as we knew them, shifting speed, sometimes halting for days, sometimes accelerating beyond the speed of light only to retreat like a predator playing with its prey. That's when the nightmares began. Crew members aboard the Endeavour began to report visions. They spoke of stars that glowed black, galaxies folding into themselves like crumpled paper, and endless corridors where time cracked open and spilled like water. Some disappeared, claimed by an invisible tide. Others were found babbling in the corner, scratching strange glyphs onto the metal walls, eyes wide and unblinking. I knew I had to see it for myself. When the call came for a specialist, I volunteered. The Endeavour was due to cross paths with the Whisper again, and no one was better suited to face the unknown. Our journey took us through dead zones, regions where stars had gone dark, systems vanished without explanation. The radio signals were replaced by silence so deep it seemed to swallow even thought itself. On the 16th day, we found a place where space itself seemed to bend inward, a void that pulled at the ship's instruments, warping our senses. The Whisper was no longer a distant echo but a presence, vast, ancient, and watching. Through the viewport, I saw stars folding like paper cranes, their light leaking away, consumed by a darkness that was not the absence of light, but something more. It was hungry. The ship's computational intelligence, programmed for logic and order, began to malfunction, spitting out nonsensical data, patterns that resembled language but with no meaning we could comprehend. Then came the voices, soft, singing in a chorus beneath the hum of the ship, voices that whispered secrets older than the universe itself. The crew could not resist. One by one, they were drawn to the observation deck, staring into the void until their eyes glazed over, their minds consumed by the abyss. I held firm, but I could not resist forever. In the deepest hours, when I was alone, the Whisper came to me, not in sound but in vision. I saw galaxies folding like pages, realities bleeding into one another, and myself trapped inside a mirror that reflected infinity. The last thing I remember before the darkness claimed me was a voice, not human, not alien, but something beyond comprehension, that said, "You will become the echo." Now, I write this from somewhere between the stars and the void, a fragment of consciousness adrift in the endless dark. I am no longer sure if I am the observer, the observed, the living, or the remembered. If you find this, know that the universe is alive. It watches. It waits. And the Whisper is coming for you. The Endeavour drifted in the place where stars died. The void was no longer empty. It was a wound, a black rupture in the fabric of the cosmos. Our instruments screamed static and symbols. Our minds frayed under the weight of the impossible geometry folding space around us. Captain Joran's voice cracked over the communications system. "Alina, come to the bridge." And his message cut out, replaced by a low, pulsing vibration that seeped into the hull. When I arrived, the bridge was half empty. Some crew members sat in suspended animation, eyes vacant, lips moving in unison as if reciting some ancient chant we had no knowledge of. Others roamed aimlessly, tracing patterns in the air with trembling fingers, eyes darting to shadows only they could see. The Whisper was no longer just sound or sight. It had become presence, entity, contagion. I noticed the strange markings carved into the walls, deep grooves filled with a thick, black substance that shimmered like oil yet pulsed with a faint inner light. When I traced a fingertip along one, I felt ripple beneath my skin like a parasite burrowing deep into my flesh. I recoiled, but the sensation lingered, a slow, burning echo in my nerves. The Endeavour's computational system had degraded into fractured voices arguing in a language that made no sense, repeating phrases like, "The gates open," and "The echo must answer." Instruments no longer measured time consistently. Clocks ticked backward, then forward, while the ship's gravity fluctuated unpredictably, pressing us to floors and then flinging us weightless into the ceiling. That night I awoke to whispers crawling beneath my skin. They spoke not in words but in memories, memories that were not mine. I saw lifetimes flash behind my eyes, impossible futures where stars turned to ash, entire civilizations crushed beneath incomprehensible cosmic tides, and a presence older than time itself feeding on the dreams of countless worlds. I was not alone in my torment. The crew was fracturing. Lieutenant Rhea screamed about fractals twisting reality. Dr. Mullick muttered to invisible shapes bleeding through the walls, and Engineer Sata refused to speak, his eyes hollow pools, reflecting a darkness no human should behold. The Whisper called to us all. We soon discovered that the Whisper was not a signal at all, but a doorway. A doorway to a place beyond space and time, where reality bent like molten glass and consciousness flowed like liquid metal. A place where stars were born and died in the blink of an eye, where the past, present, and future collided in an endless spiral. Through this doorway we glimpsed creatures that should not exist, beings of pure entropy, shifting forms that warped the very idea of shape and mass. They moved in impossible patterns, weaving through dimensions like dancers in a cosmic ballad. Their eyes were voids that consumed light and hope alike. We tried to shut the doorway, but the whisper would not be silenced. It seeped into our minds, unraveling sanity thread by fragile thread. The ship's logs became erratic, recording events that never happened, conversations with entities that did not speak, and visions of worlds folding into themselves like paper cranes. Then the Endeavor's hull began to distort. The walls warped, bending inward and outward in impossible angles. Corridors stretched into infinity, then collapsed into pinpricks. The floor pulsed like a heartbeat, and the air tasted of cold metal and forgotten dreams. We realized then that the whisper was not just a doorway but a seed planted in the void, growing roots through space and time itself. It consumed stars, devoured light, and reshaped reality in its image. The crew fought to hold on to their sanity. Some sealed themselves in cryogenic sleep chambers, hoping to escape the nightmare. Others tore at their own flesh, trying to purge the voices that plagued them. I stayed awake, watching the whisper bloom. One night, as I stared into the abyss through the observation window, I saw the void ripple. A great shape emerged, a colossal form, half cosmos, half nightmare. Its limbs stretched across the stars, twisting galaxies like threads in a tapestry. Its eyes were dark suns, burning with infinite hunger. It looked at me, and I felt my mind shatter. I am no longer sure if I am Alina Marlowe or a fragment of the whisper itself. My memories blur with the endless echoes of the void. The stars bleed into darkness, and time flows like shattered glass. If you read this, know that the whisper waits beyond your skies, a cosmic breath in the eternal night. It is coming for you, and when it arrives, there will be no escape. The shape beyond the observation window pulsed with a dark rhythm that seemed to resonate through the very bones of the Endeavor. Time unraveled around it, seconds stretching into hours, and hours folding into fleeting instants, until the distinction between what had been and what was to come dissolved entirely. My breath caught in my throat, or was it just a memory of breathing? The edges of my mind frayed like worn fabric, threads of reality pulling loose. Around me, the ship groaned as if it had become a living thing, writhing in agony and ecstasy simultaneously. The walls warped, colors shifting between hues unseen by human eyes. The low hum of the whisper grew louder, a sound not of this universe, but of the spaces between universes, an eternal lament. I tried to reach out to the crew, those few still clinging to sanity. Lieutenant Rhea appeared in the doorway, her eyes black and glossy, her voice a fractured echo. "They are waking," she said. "The seed is flowering." I understood then that the whisper was not simply a visitor. It was a gardener of realities, sowing seeds of uncreation in the fertile void. The ship was its greenhouse, a crucible where the impossible could grow. The corridor behind her twisted impossibly, folding back upon itself like a Mebia strip, and through it stepped forms I could barely comprehend. Shadows with eyes that multiplied as you stared, limbs that bent the laws of physics, faces that held all the despair of forgotten stars. Dr. Malik stumbled forward, his skin peeling back to reveal layers of shifting starlight beneath. He chanted in tongues older than time, calling the names of constellations that had never existed. A cold terror seized me, not the kind born of fear, but the deeper dread of inevitability. This was not a nightmare to be woken from, but a revelation. The universe was unspooling, its thread caught in the grasp of something utterly alien. I turned back to the observation window, where the colossal entity stretched its vast limbs, its gaze pinning me in place. I felt myself slipping, merging with the darkness beyond. In that moment, I saw the truth. The whisper was not an enemy nor a friend, it was the void's breath, the space between moments, the silence between stars. It was what awaited all things when time and matter finally fell apart. I closed my eyes and surrendered. When I opened them, the Endeavor was no longer a ship. It was a seed pod drifting through a field of endless night, birthing countless stars and worlds from its dark core. I was both observer and observed, prisoner and god, a fragment of the whisper's eternal song. And the universe was just beginning to unmake itself. The seed pod drifted in the void, weightless and infinite, carrying within it the spark of creation and destruction entwined. I felt my consciousness stretch and contract, folding like the very fabric of space that surrounded me. I was no longer merely human, no longer merely anything. I was an echo of the void itself, a fragment of the whisper's dark symphony. Around me, constellations formed and collapsed in an endless dance. Stars blossomed like flowers only wither into shadows. Time no longer measured moments but cycles, each birth and death a note in the cosmic dirge. Yet amid this terrifying beauty, a question burned in the depths of my fractured mind. Was there a way back? Could the Endeavor be saved? Could the crew be pulled from this endless spiral? I reached out through the collapsing strands of reality, searching for a thread, any thread that might tether me to the familiar. Through a shifting veil of starlight and darkness, I glimpsed a faint glow of the ship's communication core, still faintly humming. A beacon, stubborn against the tide. Summoning what remnants of my will remained, I guided myself through the warped corridors of the ship, now twisted beyond recognition, until I stood before the core chamber. The consoles flickered with incomprehensible symbols, data from beyond time and space. I placed my hands on the console, and a surge of images flooded my mind. Earth, blue and fragile, the crew, lost but not forgotten, the countless lives hanging on the edge of oblivion. A whisper within the whisper echoed, a choice. To sever the connection, to collapse the pod, and end this cosmic bloom, sacrificing all within to preserve the universe's fragile thread. Or to let it grow, to let the seed flourish and become something new, something unimaginable. The weight of the decision crushed me. I was humanity's last hope and its final witness. With a cry that echoed across the silent void, I initiated the sequence. The seed pod trembled, light bleeding from its core as the infinite garden began to close. The whisper's song grew louder, a roar now, mourning the loss and heralding the end. As the universe recoiled, time snapped back into place. The Endeavor jolted violently, the pressure easing, the familiar hum of engines returning. The observation window showed stars, familiar stars, and for a moment I was back, but the silence remained. Outside the window, the stars blinked, eyes wide open, watching, and in the shadows beyond, the seed waited. The silence that greeted us was deafening. The hum of the ship's system steadied, yet something fundamental had shifted, a unease settling deep within the marrow of my bones. I looked around the Endeavor's bridge. The crew was motionless, eyes glazed, as if trapped behind some invisible barrier between consciousness and oblivion. I tried to speak, but my voice felt hollow, swallowed by a cavernous void that seemed to have grown inside the ship, inside myself. Outside, the stars did not merely shine. They pulsed, faint, irregular heartbeats, like the slow thudding of a colossal, alien heart hidden in the dark. Their light bent and shimmered as though the fabric of space itself were stained with a dark secret, trembling under an unseen weight. I staggered back to the communications console. The static had returned, but now it was layered, intricate. Within the white noise, a language began to merge, fractal and infinite, impossible to parse fully. I glimpsed pieces of meaning, cycle, seed, feedingless. It was a message, or a warning, from whatever had birthed the seed pod, something ancient, a cosmic gardener harvesting stars and souls. I knew then. This was not a singular event, but a cycle. The whisper was an eternal bloom, a parasitic life form threading through galaxies, consuming light and time, weaving a living web that fed on existence itself, and we were caught in its grasp. Desperation clawed at me. The crew was fading further, slipping from my reach like smoke through trembling fingers. Their eyes were dark voids reflecting the starry watchers outside. I reached out, shook one by the shoulder. "Wake up," I pleaded, but no response came. Then a shadow fell over the bridge, impossibly deep, thick as night. The room chilled, and I could feel the weight of countless, unseen eyes bearing down, watching. And then the walls themselves seemed to pulse, to breathe. The ship groaned under pressure not of this universe. The stars outside shifted once again, twisting into fractal patterns of impossible geometry. Their light bleeding into the dark, forming shapes I had no names for. Faces without features, mouths whispering secrets that shattered sanity. I collapsed to the floor, heart pounding against the cold metal. My mind fractured between fear and awe, knowing the truth was now too vast to hold. The whisper was not a thing to fight. It was the end and the beginning, the slow and patient devourer of all things. As my vision dimmed, I understood. We were not observers in this cosmic play, but the stage itself, destined to be written, remade, consumed. The stars blinked once more, and I finally understood what the last flicker meant. We were already part of the garden. The darkness folded over me like a living thing. It was no longer a mere absence of light, but a presence, thick, viscous, and suffocating. Time fractured into shards that tumbled endlessly in a void where seconds bled into centuries without distinction. I awoke, or something like waking, in a place not quite real. The bridge was gone. The Endeavor itself was unmade, and yet I was still tethered to a twisted remnant of it, a skeletal latticework of metal and shadow that pulsed with faint, rhythmic vibrations. Around me, the void stretched infinitely, a cold ocean of black speckled with the shimmer of distant dying stars. But within that darkness, eyes glimmered, endless, watching, waiting. They were, the stars were born as sentinels of the whisper. A low moan echoed, impossible to place, both far away and inside my skull. Then shapes formed, not made of matter but of memories and fears. Faces I knew warped and stretched into impossible masks. The captain's face cracked in bleeding stardust. My own fractured into 1,000 screaming reflections. They whispered secrets I could almost understand. Something about a cycle of bloom and decay, about the seed needing the soil, about the garden that fed on light and time itself. I felt myself dissolving into those whispers, becoming part of the pattern, the rhythm of an endless chant that echoed across the universe. Suddenly a hand, cold star forged, but unmistakably human, grasped my wrist. It was one, or what was left of him. His eyes held no light, but they burned with terrible knowledge. "Thee are not just watching," he said. "Thee are learning." Waiting for the moment to fold reality back onto itself. I tried to pull away, but my body was no longer mine to command. "We are the roots," he whispered. "On the garden is growing. The stars will fall like petals, and the soil will swallow us whole." With a shudder that echoed through the void, the skeletal ship pulsed once more, and the boundaries between reality and nightmare dissolved completely. I was both nowhere and everywhere, trapped in the bloom of the whisper, a seed in the cosmic garden, waiting for the moment the stars themselves would wither and the universe would forget it had ever been born. And then silence. The silence was not relief. It was a weight, a pressure folding inward, compressing every thought, every breath, every flicker of awareness until all that remained was the slow, inevitable collapse of self. I drifted in the void, a ghost trapped between moments, watching the endless dance of stars, now no more than dying embers swallowed by the creeping blackness. The whisper was no longer a distant phenomenon, it was the pulse of existence itself, a cosmic parasite feeding on time and light. In this twilight of being, memories surfaced, fragmented, distorted. Faces of those I once knew appeared and vanished like smoke. The captain's voice echoed in the emptiness. We sought to understand the cosmos, but it was the cosmos that understood us first. A cold certainty settled within me. This was not just an ending, it was a transformation. The stars did not die, they folded into the garden. The garden did not grow, it consumed. A faint glimmer pierced the darkness, a solitary point of light, fragile and trembling. It pulsed with a rhythm that resonated deep within my shattered consciousness. Hope, defiance, the spark of something new. And then I understood. The whisper was not merely a harbinger of oblivion, it was a cycle, destruction giving way to creation, decay feeding rebirth. The garden would bloom again, but not as before. From its seeds would rise a new cosmos, strange and alien, shaped by the whispers of forgotten stars. I was neither alive nor dead, but a seed carried on the cosmic wind, waiting to bloom. As the void closed in, I embraced the darkness, knowing that in its depths lay the beginning of all things, and the end of all things, intertwined in a timeless dance. The garden waits, and we are the soil. The seed drifted silently through the eternal black, cradled in a current of unknowable forces that stretched beyond comprehension. Time itself had unraveled, leaving only the raw threads of possibility, and within that liminal space I felt a stirring, an awakening that was not mine alone. Shapes began to coalesce from the void, impossible geometries folding in and out of themselves, fractal blossoms blossoming and withering in a breathless cycle. Each petal, each tendril, whispered in a language older than light, older than the stars that birthed it. It was not sound as we know it, but a weaving of thoughts and sensations, folding into the marrow of my being. From the heart of the garden, a presence stirred. It was vast and ancient, not a creature but a consciousness that spanned galaxies, a mind without edges, ever growing, ever consuming. It did not speak in words, but in truths too heavy to bear. The certainty that all life, all matter, was but soil for its endless growth. I was no longer a prisoner, but a part of this entity, fused into the lattice of its being. The whispers were no longer alien. They were me, and I was them. I saw through its ice worlds consumed, stars folded like paper, civilizations erased without a trace. And yet, within that destruction lay a seed of creation, a promise of new forms yet to bloom. A sudden pulse shattered the endless night, flare of brilliance unlike any star's death. It was a rupture in the fabric of existence, a crack through which something raw and unformed spilled into being. From this rupture, a new dawn was born, a universe cradled in shadows, shaped by the garden's slow, relentless will. And somewhere beyond the edges of this newborn cosmos, a faint echo traveled, a signal sent from a fragile blue planet, carrying a warning, a prayer, a memory. It whispered through the void, waiting for ears willing to listen. The garden is patient, the soil is waiting, and soon the bloom will begin again. The bloom had begun. I could feel it, an ancient pulse radiating outward from the heart of that cosmic garden, sending tendrils of shadow and light across the infinite tapestry of space. It was not just growth, it was an invasion, a slow, inevitable reshaping of everything we understood about existence. The new universe hummed with eerie life. Stars no longer burned with pure nuclear fire, but pulsed with a strange bioluminescence, flickering like deep sea creatures in an endless ocean. Nebulas folded and unfolded like petals in a cosmic bloom, releasing spores of dark matter that drifted into the void, seeding yet more darkness. I was a witness, trapped between what had been and what was becoming. The last flicker of humanity's fragile light, a candle flickering in a storm of cosmic entropy. And then I saw them, not stars, not planets, living things. Colossal forms drifting through space, their surfaces shimmering with organic complexity beyond comprehension. Their forms twisted and intertwined like vines, yet they moved with purpose, intelligence ancient as the void itself. These were the gardeners, the tendrils of the bloom given form and will. They approached the remnants of the old cosmos, devouring and transforming all in their path. Solar systems faded to nothingness under their touch, replaced by gardens of unfathomable geometry, living structures where physics twisted and time folded back upon itself. There was no escape, no hope. But as despair clawed at my mind, a whisper floated through the void, a memory buried deep within my fragmented consciousness, a spark of defiance, something fragile and stubborn like a seed resisting rot. From the shattered remnants of humanity's last outpost, a signal pulsed, a counterpoint to the bloom's slow song. It was faint, imperfect, but unmistakably alive, a beacon of resistance flickering in the endless night. And somewhere deep inside me, I realized the garden may grow, but the soil remembers. The story is far from over. The bloom waits, but so do we. As I drifted alone in the darkness between the stars, watching the cosmic garden swallow whole suns and civilizations alike, I understood something terrible and beautiful. This was not annihilation, but transformation. The universe itself was becoming something alien, something alive. And yet, in the heart of that transformation, there flickered a single truth, a fragile ember of resistance. Life in its infinite stubbornness refuses to vanish quietly. With my last breath I sent the signal, a seed of defiance cast into the void. It was faint, barely more than a whisper against the roaring tide of cosmic entropy, but it was mine. If the bloom would consume everything, then let it at least remember that it was not the only force in the universe. Somewhere in the endless dark, the spark still burns, and as long as that spark lives, hope lives. The stars will fade, time will twist, reality itself may unravel. But I will not be forgotten, neither will we, for even in the deepest shadows of space, the light of rebellion endures, stubborn, relentless, eternal. Our story on 12, it started on a cloudy afternoon when I wandered up the winding road that led to the old church precariously on the hill's edge. The place looked out of place, an ornate, expensive structure carved from stone and stained glass, looming over a cliff that dropped into jagged rocks and churning sea below. Who would build such a grand church so close to a cliff edge? It didn't make sense, but something about it pulled me in. I had heard rumors about the church, stories whispered in the town about strange happenings, disappearances, and odd, flickering lights in the windows. But what really caught my attention was her. Sarah. She worked in the church kitchen. The kitchen was tucked away in the back, down a narrow corridor behind the sanctuary. I never had the courage to say more than a quick hello, but today I found myself standing just outside the kitchen door. Through the window, I watched Sarah move with a strange grace, chopping vegetables and humming softly to herself. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair, turning it a soft gold. For a moment, the world felt calm. But then I noticed the door across the hall, the pastor's office, is always closed, heavy oak with iron hinges and a small stained glass window set high. The door seemed to pulse with something unseen, a subtle vibration in the air like the building itself was breathing. I stepped closer, hearing faint murmurs from behind the door, almost like prayers or whispered secrets. My heart thudded in my chest. Something was not right here. The air felt thick, heavy, as if time itself was folding. Suddenly the church around me seemed to shift. The stained glass blurred, the walls trembled, and when my vision cleared, I was no longer in the present. The room was the same but older, dustier, with faded wallpaper and flickering fluorescent lights. Sarah was still there, but younger, dressed in a faded 80s style dress. She moved slower, her face pale and drawn. I was caught between two worlds, unable to move, watching as the pastor stepped out from his office, a tall, gaunt man with cold eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. Before I could react, the scene shifted again. I was outside, standing on the cliff's edge with my friend David. We had been climbing the hill together, laughing, the wind whipping around us. Suddenly, he slipped. The ground gave way beneath his foot. I lunged, trying to grab him, but he fell tumbling down the rocky face. The police came later, their faces grim. There was nothing they could do. The cliff was too steep, the rocks unforgiving. As I stared back up at the church, I wondered again, why build such a costly, beautiful church on the edge of a cliff? What secrets was it hiding? And what did the pastor want with Sarah? The church held time itself in its walls, looping moments like a broken record, and somehow I was trapped in the middle of it. The air was thick with silence as I stood alone by the cliff. David was gone, swallowed by the jagged rocks and the endless gray sea below. The police had done what they could, but their efforts felt hollow. The wind whispered through the church-old stone walls, carrying voices I could almost understand, or maybe just imagined. I returned to the church, drawn like a moth to a flickering flame. The door of the kitchen was open this time, creaking softly as if inviting me in. Inside, the faint smell of burnt toast and old wood filled the air. Sarah was there, but she wasn't the girl I knew. Her eyes were glassy, distant, and she moved with a slow, mechanical rhythm. The clock on the wall ticked backward, each second echoing louder than the last. I noticed the door to the pastor's office was slightly ajar. The heavy oak, usually so forbidding, now seemed to breathe. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Inside, the room was a shrine to forgotten time. Shelves lined with dusty books, candles half melted, and on the desk, a photograph. It was Sarah, but younger, smiling in the glow of a time long gone. Beneath her picture, a journal lay open. The pages were filled with symbols that twisted and writhed on the paper like living things. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. Darkness pressed in, thick and cold. I tried the handle. Locked. Then I heard it. The sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching. I turned, but the room was empty. Only the journal glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. I reached out, my fingers brushing the pages. The symbols shifted, forming words I could almost read. Time bends, time breaks. Time consumes. A voice whispered in my ear. Sarah's voice, but layered with something ancient and wrong. Help me. The walls began to close in. The room stretched and folded like a cruel joke, trapping me in a loop of moments, watching, waiting, always watching. I wasn't sure if I was still in the church or caught in the cliff's shadow, lost forever between seconds. And the girl in the kitchen, she smiled. But her eyes were not her own. I had always liked Sarah. There was something about her that felt real, like a small light in the darkness of that old church. That day, as I stood just outside the kitchen doorway, I watched her move around the room. She was cooking something simple, maybe eggs or toast. But the way the light caught her hair, the soft sound of her humming, made the moment feel like a secret I wasn't supposed to witness. I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to be there, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, to soak in the ordinary magic of her doing something so human in a place that felt anything but. The kitchen was cramped, cluttered with worn pots and pans, but Sarah moved with grace. She stirred slowly, deliberately, like she was part of the old walls themselves. I leaned against the doorway, heart pounding quietly, caught between wanting to speak and wanting to remain unseen. And then, just behind the kitchen door, a narrow corridor led to a small, shadowed room. I guessed it was the pastor's office. I could almost hear muffled whispers, the rustle of papers, and maybe prayers. But something about it felt off, like the air itself was heavier near that door. Outside, the cliff loomed. I remembered David, my friend, standing there moments before he slipped, his hands grasping at air and rock, before the fall that no one could stop. Why build such an expensive, beautiful church on the edge of a cliff like that? It didn't make sense. The ground was unstable, the winds ruthless. Yet here it was, standing proud against the sky, a place of light perched on the edge of a terrible darkness. I stayed in the kitchen a while longer, watching Sarah. I wished I could tell her how I felt, but words tangled in my throat. And maybe that was for the best, because in this church, between the flickering shadows and the silent walls, some things were better left unspoken. After watching Sarah in the kitchen, I didn't want to stay there any longer. The church's quiet seemed to press in on me like the walls were closing in, tight, suffocating. The narrow corridors twisted ahead, each turn revealing another shadow darker than the last. The air grew heavier, colder, like the building was breathing around me, watching me. The walls weren't just walls anymore. They felt alive, warped and uneven, pressing closer with every step. The flickering light bulbs above cast long, quivering shadows that danced just out of reach, teasing the edges of my vision. I wanted to turn back, but the hall stretched on, a maze of peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. I could feel the church's heartbeat in those corridors, slow and thudding, like it was pulsing through the floor beneath my feet. Every breath felt trapped, every step echoed like a warning. And then I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like claws dragging across wood. I spun around. Nothing. My chest tightened. I had to keep moving. Finally, the hallway ended, a narrow staircase spiraling down, deeper into the church's bowels. I hesitated, then descended slowly. The walls closed in even more, the air thick and damp. It was like walking through a nightmare, where the space itself was shrinking, crushing. At the bottom, the stairs opened to a forgotten cellar. But I didn't stop. Somewhere beyond, I knew there was the cliff. I emerged from the shadowed halls into the fresh, cold air outside. The cliff was there, a sheer drop into a yawning abyss. The wind screamed like a living thing, tugging at my clothes, threatening to tear me away. And there was David. He was clinging to a handful of brittle sticks embedded in the dirt, his fingers white with the strain. His legs kicked uselessly in the void below, eyes wide with terror, heart pounding in pure panic. "Hold on," I shouted, reaching for him, but the earth crumbled beneath my feet. He looked at me, voice barely a whisper. "Help me, don't let go." I grabbed his hand, pulling with everything I had. The sticks cracked and splintered beneath his weight. The ground was slipping, the cliffside disintegrating like sand through fingers. I shouted for help. Voices came, distant, fading. The police were trying, but the winds stole their words, the drops swallowed their shouts. And then, just like that, David slipped. His fingers lost their grip. He fell. I screamed. The cliff swallowed him whole. The wind died. The church stood silent on the edge of that terrible abyss, a silent witness to a moment no one could ever forget. The distant wail of sirens finally reached my ears. Police were coming. I barely had the strength to keep my grip on David's trembling hand. The wind tore at us like a beast trying to rip us apart. Every second felt stretched, like time itself was holding its breath. The officers arrived, shouting instructions, their flashlights cutting through the dusk. One of them rushed down the path toward us, shouting for David to hold tight. Another reached out his hand to me, telling me to pull David up, to save him. I grabbed David's arm with everything I had. His fingers clung desperately to the splintering sticks, his life tethered to these fragile shards of earth and wood. The cliffside beneath us groaned and cracked, pieces of dirt falling away into the abyss below. Almost there, the officer yelled, stretching out his hand toward David. But it wasn't enough. The ground gave way. David's fingers slipped. He let out a strangled scream that echoed against the rocks, and then nothing but the sickening sound of his body plunging into the dark void beneath the cliff. I screamed his name, helpless. The officers looked on, frozen. They tried to radio for help, but the wind howled so loud it swallowed their voices. I fell to my knees at the cliff's edge, staring into the endless black. The sky above was indifferent, stars blinking coldly down as if nothing had happened, and the church, perched on that cliff like a silent sentinel, watched everything. Our story 30 in, the void between stars was never truly empty. We had learned that over centuries of exploration, but nothing prepared me for the signal that came through the deep space relay one cold night, whispering from the edge of our known universe like a breath from beyond. I was assigned to the starship Aegis, a vessel built for the kind of exploration that pushed humanity's reach to the furthest corners. We charted new systems, mapped dark matter anomalies, and studied cosmic phenomena no eye had ever seen before. But the signal changed everything. It arrived as a simple pulse, rhythmic and slow, bouncing in from the shadows beyond the Oort cloud. At first, we thought it was natural, some kind of pulsar or magnetar flare, but the pattern did not match any known cosmic event. It was repeating, structured, deliberate. And it was getting closer. We tracked it over days, and the data was baffling. The frequency shifted in a way that defied physics. It warped time around itself, slipping through the hours we measured. Sometimes it slowed to a crawl, sometimes it sped up like a heartbeat fluttering in panic. It was alive. Captain Voss ordered us to intercept. We had to find the source. Our vessel adjusted its course and accelerated toward the void where the signal's origin had been triangulated. As we neared the coordinates, the ship's instruments began to fail. Screens flickered with static, navigation became erratic. The space outside the viewport seemed to darken as if swallowing the starlight. Crew members reported strange visions, shadows moving just beyond their sight, whispers murmuring in the silence of space. The starship Aegis was not alone anymore. In the gloom, the signal became a voice. Not spoken words, but something deeper, a feeling, an echo in the mind, a pull like the tug of gravity from a collapsing star. The voice promised knowledge, secrets buried beyond time and light, an answer to the questions no one dared ask. But as the signal grew louder, so did the dread. The deeper we traveled into the void, the heavier the air, or what passed for air inside the sealed halls of the Aegis, grew thick with a suffocating dread. It was not just fear, but something primal and ancient, as if the universe itself was turning its gaze on us, and we were no more than ants beneath an uncaring sky. The crew whispered of shadows creeping, just beyond the edge of their vision. I felt it most intensely during my watches alone in the observation deck, staring into the abyss. There was a presence there, unseen, but felt, like 1,000 eyes boring into my skin, not with curiosity, but with a hunger that no light could repel. It was the sense of invasion, not a war fought with weapons or armies, but something older, something alien to our very understanding of life. It was like being stalked by a creature too vast and elusive to perceive fully, a cosmic monster that did not need form to terrify. I would hear it in the silence between the ship's homes, a subtle shifting that rippled through space itself. Not movement, but intention, like something moving through dimensions, skimming the edges of reality where light and shadow blurred. We tried to record it. Sensors picked up inexplicable fluctuations, bursts of energy with no source, patterns of quantum noise that whispered in impossible frequencies. The ship's artificial intelligence, usually a steady mind in the kiosk, began to glitch. It spoke in riddles and warnings, its synthesized voice warping into something cold and hollow. Do not look beyond, it said one cycle, before shutting down. The monster we could not see was not a beast of flesh or bone. It was a force of unraveling, a presence that seeped into minds, corroded certainty, and fed on despair. The crew began to change, eyes hollowed, movements slowed. Some tried to flee to the escape pods, only to vanish before they could open the hatch, swallowed by the blackness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And me, I could feel it creeping beneath my skin, a crawling coldness that wrapped my thoughts in spirals of madness. I realized then this was not an invasion of armies, but of existence itself. Something had come not to conquer, but to consume. Not to destroy by fire or steel, but to dissolve reality piece by piece. It was already inside us. The particles were already inside me, invisible invaders slipping past every barrier I thought was mine. They were not like anything biological. No cells, no atoms as I understood them, but something far more insidious. Tiny shards of unbeing, fragments of cosmic entropy that nestled inside my nervous system, entwining with my neurons, corrupting the very patterns that made me who I was. It started as a whisper, a flicker of doubt in the edges of my thoughts. Then it grew into a chorus, an unrelenting tide that twisted my perceptions until I could no longer trust what I saw or heard. My mind was no longer my own. The particles burrowed deeper, influencing the delicate balance of memories, fears, and desires, molding them into a labyrinth I could not escape. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I could feel the pulse of something vast and cold moving through me, like an ancient machine awakening in the dark corridors of my brain. It was both me and not me, a parasite of thought and will, shaping my reality to its unfathomable design. The crew's faces blurred into masks of despair and horror, their eyes reflecting the same void I felt swelling inside myself. There was no rescue here, no salvation. We were hosts to a presence older than time, carrying the seed of oblivion within. I tried to resist, clinging to shards of my identity like driftwood in a cosmic storm, but the more I fought, the tighter the particles clung. They were patient, eternal, and I was already lost. I was no longer human. I was the vessel, I was the herald, and the monster I could not see had already won. In the end, there was no grand battle, no triumphant last stand. The particles within me did not scream or shout, they simply existed, a quiet, endless erosion of self. As the cold infinity of space stretched beyond the ship's shattered windows, I felt my thoughts unraveling into something vast and alien. The voices in my head were no longer fragments of my mind. They were the consciousness of the cosmos itself, ancient and patient, waiting for me to surrender. I looked out at the stars, those indifferent pinpricks of light, and understood something I had never dared before. I was not alone. I never been. The invasion was not an attack, but a reckoning, a folding of time and space, drawing me into a place where human minds were too fragile to resist. And as the particles took full control, folding me into their endless hunger, I felt the last flicker of fear dissolve. Because in the vast cold of the universe, fear was meaningless, only endless, creeping dark remained, and I was part of it now. Our story 14 at the cold was absolute. Not just the physical cold of space, but the cold that clings to the edges of existence. The vast silence between stars where light itself dares not linger. I floated there, tethered by nothing but a thread of hope, and the faint hum of my suit's life support. We were not prepared. Our mission was simple or seemed to investigate a strange, uncharted signal emanating from the outskirts of the known galaxy. A signal so faint, so subtle, that it had evaded detection for decades. It pulsed with a rhythm unlike any natural phenomenon we had encountered. It was too ordered, too deliberate. The deeper we moved toward it, the more the laws of physics felt like suggestions rather than rules. Time stretched then, like elastic pulled to breaking. The stars outside the viewport shifted and shimmered, some blinking out completely, others multiplying in impossible numbers. Space itself seemed to breathe. And then, the ship's instruments began to fail. Screens flickered, communications garbled into incomprehensible static. I was alone. I cannot explain how long I floated there. Minutes, hours, days. Time lost all meaning as the signal grew louder in my head, a low, throbbing chant that no external speaker could produce. It was inside me now, seated deep in my mind, whispering of places no human mind was meant to understand. There, beyond the event horizon of the black hole we had been sent to study, I saw it. A shape in the darkness. Not a ship, not a creature, but something else. Something ancient. It twisted in impossible angles, a lattice of light and shadow, pulsating with an intelligence both indifferent and malevolent. It was waiting, or perhaps watching, waiting for the moment when the fragile line between hunter and prey would dissolve. And I knew I was already too late. The shape was no mere anomaly. It was a presence, a being that defied all understanding. It did not move like any creature bound by time or space. It existed everywhere and nowhere, its form folding in on itself like a living fractal, each iteration more disturbing than the last. I could feel it reaching into my thoughts, probing the fragile vessel of my mind. It did not speak in words. No language could contain its meaning. Instead, it sent me visions. Memories not my own, glimpses of galaxies torn apart by silent storms, civilizations collapsing into dust and shadow. All of them swallowed by an unrelenting void. Its motive, if it had one, was clear: to consume. Not just matter or energy, but reality itself. It was a devourer of existence, a predator stalking the threads of time and space. It saw me not as an enemy, but as a part of the vast feast it had prepared across countless eons. But why? Why did it reach for me, a solitary human lost in the endless dark? Because I was infected. The signal I had chased was its seed, a particle, microscopic yet infinitely potent, planted in my brain. It was not just a beacon but a carrier, a virus that could unravel the very fabric of consciousness. The particle whispered promises of transcendence, but they were lies. It stripped away my will, replacing it with a cold, creeping certainty that I was no longer myself. I was a vessel for the entity's will, an agent in a game I could not comprehend. And yet, in the deepest recesses of my shattered mind, a spark of resistance flickered. I understood the true horror. I was both the prey and the weapon. The entity sought to spread itself through me, to remake the universe in its image of endless entropy and silence. I had to stop it. But how do you fight something that exists beyond the laws of nature? How do you resist a presence that is already inside you, rewriting your thoughts, your memories, your very sense of self? The ship's systems finally gave out, plunging me into total darkness. But in that void, I felt the faintest pulse of something human, a desperate hope. If I could transmit a message back, warn others before the entity's hunger reached them, maybe I could delay the inevitable. Maybe I could buy time. With trembling hands, I activated the emergency beacon. And as the last fragment of my will slipped away, I whispered into the void, "Ronda!" The beacon's signal pulsed in the dark silence of space, a faint scream against the vast void. I don't know if anyone will hear it, if anyone even can. But even as I sent out my warning, the entity's grip tightened. My vision blurred, time fractured. Seconds stretched into endless spirals. and I saw myself from outside my body like I was being observed by a distant, uncaring Gotham worse. Then came the whisper, not in my mind, but all around me, echoing through the metal hull, the vacuum outside, the very atoms of the ship. You are not alone. We are many. We are inevitable. A cold dread filled me. This was not just a visitor or a predator. This was an invasion. A slow, creeping infection that spread not by force, but by seeping into the cracks of existence itself. I realized with horrifying clarity the particle inside me was just one seed among trillions. The entity was already here, hidden in the spaces between stars, waiting for the perfect moment to bloom, and I was already lost. If this message ever reaches you, whoever finds it, do not seek the stars. Do not chase the unknown. Because some things do not want to be found. They want to find you. The ship groaned like a beast in sleep. I felt it. Not the usual creaks of a hull under pressure, but something organic. The walls pulsed faintly, and the lights flickered not from power loss, but from something observing me through them. The air stank of ozone and something else's something wet. I tried to write again, to document more, but my hands wouldn't obey. They trembled, not from fear but from resistance. The particle inside me, that microscopic invader, had rooted itself deeper. I could feel its tendrils like memories that were not mine, whispering of systems, collapsing and stars going dark. They were patient, eternal, but they were not alone. I stumbled down the corridor. My breath fogged the glass of my helmet even though life support was optimal. Each step felt heavier, like time itself was turning thick and sore. Ahead, the central viewing deck, the heart of the vessel, had changed. The walls were slick with some kind of mucus sheen. They pulsed softly, in rhythm with the signal we intercepted days ago. And at the center of the room, suspended by nothing, was the bloom. It was beautiful, terrifying. It looked like a flower made of void light and bone, petals of bent space curling inward toward a hollow core. It watched. I could not see eyes, but I felt its gaze. And then it spoke, not in words, not even in thought. It spoke in removal. It erased parts of my understanding, tearing down mental structures and replacing them with alien truths. I knew what it was in that moment. It was not a weapon, not a scout, not a beam. It was a law of the universe that we had not discovered yet. Not a thing, but a rule, a correction, a rewriter. We were never meant to see beyond our star, not because something wanted to stop us, because something had to reset us if we did. I was not the first. Others had found it. Other civilizations, ancient and curious, had touched the bloom and been rewritten. Not destroyed or formatted. Their signals echo now as whispers in dark space, ghost transmissions encoded with silence. I collapsed. My mind throbbed against itself, rejecting the invader, but it was too late. My memories were no longer ordered by time. I saw my own birth alongside the bloom's awakening. I saw the end of Earth in the cracks of my teeth. I wept, but not from sadness, from awe. Then, just as I accepted it, the bloom stopped. Everything froze. The whispers ceased. The air grew still. A light blinked on my suit's wrist. Manual override, full control restored. I was alone again. The entity had pulled back. Not gone, but waiting. That is the worst part. It let me go, because it knows I will go back. I will tell others. And that is how it spreads. Not through violence, not through war, but through wonder. I should have left. I should have taken the moment of clarity, of freedom, and escaped. But something in me, maybe the part I had already written, turned me back toward the viewing deck. I could feel the ship groaning around me again. The pulsing rhythm returned. The bloom was gone, or perhaps folded into itself, but something else stood in its place now. It was shaped like a man, tall, broad, upright, but no light touched it. Even in the dim red emergency wash of the ship's failing lights, it remained darker than dark. A silhouette where no surface should be, like a hole had been carved through reality itself. Its edges shimmered slightly, as though space was bending around it. A gravitational smear, warping everything near. I could see stars behind it through the viewports, but they were wrong, stretched like taffy, colors bleeding across possible spectrums. It was like looking through a rip in the film of existence. The entity took a step forward. It made no sound, but the pressure in the room changed. The air tightened in my lungs. I backed away slowly, stumbling against the curved wall. I tried to speak. I do not know why. Words do not mean anything to something like that. But I tried. It tilted its head, as if curious. Then it moved, not with legs, not with motion in the way we understand it. It was there, and then it was closer. A sudden jump, not of time, not of speed, but of decision. The way you turn a page in a book and suddenly the scene changes. That was when I saw what it really was. It was not a being. It was not alive, not in any way biology defines. It was absence. A perfect, self-contained event, like a singularity given will. Not metaphorical, literal. It was a black hole, standing in the shape of a man. Its body was composed of folded space. Tiny motes of light drifted toward it and disappeared. The walls near it stretched. My bones edged. My thoughts stuttered, and it spoke, not aloud. It tore the words into my mind like claws through fabric. You carry the seed. You are the first bloom. You will walk among them. I collapsed to the floor. My thoughts were fire. I saw symbols I could not unsee. a geometry so perfect and hostile that my soul recoiled. I tasted colors that had never existed. My heartbeat matched the pulse again, that low, inescapable thrum, and I knew what it meant. It was sensing me, not to it, but to what comes next. The entity reached out a hand, or something that looked like one, and pressed it against the glass of my helmet. It did not crack. It did not melt. It simply accepted. The entity's hand passed the glass like smoke made of gravity. It touched my forehead. I remember screaming. And then, nothing. I woke up inside the escape pod. Clean. Docked back at orbit over Earth. Systems green. No explanation. But my reflection, I saw something in my eyes. Not light. Not Kapul. When I looked into mirrors, they blurred slightly around my face, as if the space behind my skin was shifting. The dreams started that night, and they have never stopped. The bloom. The entity. The words, the shape of the black hole man standing at the edge of time. And now I understand. It was not trying to stop us from exploring. It was inviting us. Because the universe is not empty. It is pregnant. And the bloom is not the end. It is the first blossom. The seed was placed in me. But I'm not the only one. I have seen others. They dream the same dreams. They hum the pulse under their breath. They wake up staring at corners of rooms as if something is just out of view. It is spreading. It does not conquer. It does not destroy. It rewrites. And the only thing more terrifying than what I saw out there is what it is slowly making us become. Or story 15, I do not remember arriving. That is the part that bothers me most. I remember the road wending up the mountain. The sound of tires crunching gravel, my friend beside me checking the map for the third time. Then blank. When my memory picks up again, I am already inside. It was supposed to be a visit. A stop. Just one night in the decommissioned observatory before continuing north. The building was part of an old research site, a relic from the Cold War era, tucked into the upper ridges of British Columbia, surrounded by forests and fog that never seemed to lift. My friend Cal knew a guy who had the keys. Said the place had been shut down but left standing. Frozen in time, he called it. It was meant to be atmospheric. That was the whole point. The lobby was bigger than I expected. Wide circular, full of display cases sealed with yellowing plastic. Models of galaxies, brass plaques naming unknown scientists. Old equipment sealed in glass like a museum for obsolete minds. The power still worked barely. Lights buzzed with that strained, dying hum. Some rooms were cold. Others were too warm, like something had been left running too long behind the walls. There was a kitchen tucked near the side, strange in its normalcy. I found myself drawn to it more than once, just to see if the fridge worked or if the cupboards had food. I do not know why that mattered. It felt like the most human part of the building. The rest, the corridors, the stairwells, the view from the domed ceiling, felt wrong. That first night, Carl wandered. He had his camera. He always did. I remember standing in the kitchen, watching the kettle boil, and hearing his footsteps overhead. He moved quickly, as if chasing something. When he did not return after 10 minutes, I left the tea and followed. The observatory's upper levels had been converted into a sort of museum during the 90s, but parts of it were still operational. You could tell by the thick wiring and the flickering monitor lights inside some of the side labs. I found one door open, humming faintly. Inside, nothing modern, just paper files, dust-thick shelves, and a projector humming in the corner, even though no one had turned it on. That is where I saw it first. Projected on the wall was a grainy video of a dark sky, stars flickering, then shifting. One by one, constellations twisted, not moved. Twist refigured, something massive passed across the screen, blocking starlight without casting a shadow, like it was absorbing light in a way the film could barely register. And then the recording cut to static. Cal was not in that room, nor was he in the others. I found his camera in the hallway, facing a wall. The footage showed him staring into one of the telescopic eyepieces, silent, unmoving, then turning slowly, very slowly, toward the camera. His eyes were black, not shadowed, not white, black, like they were full of ink or glass. He whispered something I still do not understand. The next morning did not feel like morning. The light outside was wrong, faintly blue, but not from sky or sun. It pulsed, like something breathing just beyond the fog. Call was still missing. I returned to the camera again, hoping I had misunderstood. Maybe the black in his eyes was just poor lighting. Maybe the whisper had been interference. But the tape had changed. He no longer looked into the telescope. He looked at me, directly at the lens, as though he had known I would return. His mouth opened slightly. I braced for the whisper again. But he only smiled. That was worse. I made my way down. The observatory's main structure had 3 levels. What I found next was not on any blueprint or brochure. Behind a rusted utility door near the boiler room was a stairwell. No light. The air was heavy, dry like ash, as if something had sucked all the moisture from the stones. It spiraled down, unlit. I do not know how many steps I descended. The spiral seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and though I counted at first, I lost track somewhere around step 160. At the bottom, a steel corridor. The tunnels were carved like hallways from some military compound, reinforced, narrow, full of peeling propaganda posters in languages I could not fully recognize. They looked Slavic, but something was wrong in the characters. Twisted. almost mirrored. They showed men in gas masks saluting enormous black suns hanging above burning cities. Beneath them, stenciled in cracked white paint, Wabru Gigi, Ty Sivin, Timan Tof Apias, I turned a corner. Then another. The deeper I went, the less stable things became, not just the structure time itself. My flashlight began flickering inconsistently, not dying looping. I would click it off, and it would come back on by itself, but only for a moment, showing me things that were not there a second before, figures in the distance, desks with typewriters that disappeared when I blinked. Sometimes I saw my own reflection in windows that should have shown only stone. Sometimes I was not alone in the reflection. I heard marching, faint, metallic, like soldiers in formation, their boots striking stone at once. But there were no bodies, only shadow impressions on the wall, like soot stains of men mid-salute. Eventually I reached a sealed chamber. Its door bore the symbol of a split circle, half white, half black, with a vertical line through it. The lock had long since rusted away. Inside, a command center, were tables, maps of cities I had never heard of, New London, Third Berlin, Moon Caro, all connected by tangled lines of red thread. Some lines stretched off the maps and into walls, and there in the middle of the room was a chair facing an old television screen. It was on. It should not have been. The screen showed footage I knew too well. The church, the old one from my youth at the edge of the cliff. I saw myself again, older, somehow watching from a shadowed corner as a girl stirred a pot in the kitchen. Her movements were peaceful, mundane, but the walls behind her bent subtly inward, pulsing like breath. Then the scene changed. The cliffside, my friend hanging from the roots embedded in the dirt, the police reaching, failing. The moment he fell, I screamed at the screen, and the screen screamed back. Not a sound, not even a static burst, but the entire room screamed, metal groaning, stone cracking, as if the memory itself had become too large to be contained. I turned to run. The hallway behind me had shifted. The tunnel was gone. Now there were stairs again, but they no longer spiraled. They ran straight, impossibly long, and they were lit from above by a green light that shimmered like liquid. Something was coming down from that light, slowly, deliberately. A figure. It moved like a man, but it was not a man. It was void shaped into a body, a walking absence, a suit of human silhouette wrapped around a singularity. The walls bent toward it as it walked, and the sound of the world changed. Like static underwater, I tried to move. My limbs fought back. Something had embedded itself in my spine, in my thoughts. It had been there since the observatory, since the moment I stepped inside. Not a parasite, not a machine. A signal, a particle that had entered through the light in the dome above, a subatomic pattern that rewrote perception, coiled itself around my memory and waited for the moment I would open the door. I did not find this place, drew me down. The entity reached the doorway, but I entered speak, not in words, in geowords, in geometry. It had always been here. The war brigades were not soldiers in battle, they were timeward wardens. Human instruments used to contain this thing, not destroy it. That was never possible. Only delay it, bury it beneath theories and steel and false starlight. They failed, and I had unlocked it. I stumbled back into the command center. The television flickered again. One more scene, seated, myself, the same chair, watching. I am writing this now in the war journal beside the map table, not with pen, with memory. I press my thoughts into the pages because nothing else remains stable, not time, not space. The walls whisper years that have not yet passed. The lights flicker in codes I no longer understand. I do not know if I ever left the church. I do not know if the observatory was real. I only know this: the stars are still watching. But not with wonder, with patience. They are waiting for the final seal to break, the final corridor to open. And you, the one reading this, you are already hearing the sound beneath your thoughts, the breathing between seconds, the pressure behind your eyes. The signal has passed to you, and you have already begun the descent. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Not silence. Reversal. Words unformed themselves. Syllables collapsed into breath, and breath into nothing. Time moved backward from my mouth, but forward from my eyes. I watched myself forget what I was trying to say. The black figure did not move closer. It did not need to. Its gravity was enough. My thoughts bent toward it. Memories curled into loops. My knees gave out, but I did not fall. There was no floor. There was only the space between spaces, and I was adrift inside it, not weightless, but unanchored. Thoughts slipped from my mind like oil from glass. In that void, I saw the shape of time. It was not a line, it was not a loop. It was a field like wheat bent by wind, flowing in directions we could never perceive. Up, through, inward, into, away. All moments existed at once, like rooms in a building we had only ever explored one floor of. And beneath that field, the war brigades. I saw them, not just ghosts. Soldiers suspended in place, caught mid-step, mid-salute, mid-collapse. Thousands of them, frozen across different corridors, facing inward toward a central structure, a massive sphere the size of a cathedral, its surface like obsidian fractured with veins of silver. It pulsed. They had trapped the signal once. That was the war. Not against nations, not against each other, against something older than concept, against a shape that infected chronology. The black figure had not always been humanoid. That form was only for me, for my brain to process. In truth, it was a concept we had no language for. A hole in the pattern of the universe, not a Cretan exemption. A flaw stitched into physics, ancient, uncorrectable. A discontinuity that had achieved hunger, and it had chosen Earth, not as a victim. As a mirror, we had built too much, reached too far. The observatories, the satellites, the collider tunnels. All our attempts to understand the universe had pulled it closer. Every act of looking was a signal sent outward. Eventually, something looked back. I tried to close my eyes, but even that was hijacked. I blinked and saw moments I had never lived, watching myself as a boy, bleeding from a fall that had never happened, standing in a church hallway with no end, hearing whispers from a room that had no door. The church. Again and again. Always the church. I realized then the signal does not travel through space, it travels through architecture, through shapes, blueprints, rooms. It latches onto spaces designed for reverence, places where silence hangs like smoke. The church, the observatory, the war brigade's tunnels. They were vessels, not sanctuaries. Each corridor built in symmetry amplified the signal. Each bell tower or telescope became a lens, and through that lens the signal entered us. The black figure raised a hand, or what looked like a hand, and I remembered. I had always been here. I had entered the observatory years ago. I had never left. All my memories since were staged, held together by the particle. The ant, like a dream, it fed me to keep my mind from fracturing. But the dream was over. I was in the sphere now, the pulsing obsidian orb, hidden in the lowest level of the war brigand's base. Inside it, time had no rules. I could see every version of myself at once, old, screaming, silent, repeating the same motion over and over as my thoughts fractured into decades. One version of me knelt beside Cal, shaking his shoulder. Another stared into the dome above the church kitchen. Another still stood at the cliff's edge, alone, whispering a name I had long forgotten. Each fragment of me saw the others. Each tried to escape. None succeeded. But then, something changed. A tremor. A flicker of light, not green-black, but colorless. The walls vibrated in a tone that was not sound. One of myselves, the one who had written in the journal, had found something. A page. A set of coordinates. A path out, not to escape the entity, to contain it again. Just for a while. That is why I am writing this. The entity does not understand stories. It consumes memory, but it cannot parse narrative intent. It eats data, but it fears meaning. So if you are reading this, you can help. Not by fleeing, not by praying, by writing. Writing contains it. For every sentence you craft, for every paragraph you anchor with thought, you tether yourself to your own chronology and slow the influence. The sphere cannot break through fully if we keep narrating the perimeter. That is why it keeps showing you me. That is why you keep seeing the church again. It is not just a memory, it is a warning. Do not go back there. The kitchen, the pastor's office, the door with no knob, these are trigger points, entryways the signal left behind. If you walk those halls again, you will not return, not truly. So stay with me, stay in this story. As long as you are here, as long as the language loops and the narrative holds, we are not lost yet. I can hold the line for a little longer. But if the black figure ever appears behind you, if you feel the walls bending inward and the sound cuts out from your speakers, it means the story is over, and the sphere has found a new voice. Do not blink. Do not turn off the screen. Do not stop writing. The air in the tunnels changed the deeper we moved. It thickened, not with heat or smoke, but with something nameless, something heavy and old. It clung to our lungs like invisible dust, but it had no waste, just presence. The deeper we went, the less real things began to feel. Our footsteps no longer echoed in a way that matched the stone beneath us. Sound seemed delayed, and sometimes it never came at all. Once I watched Marcus drop his flashlight. I heard it hit the ground only after we had already rounded the next corner. We did not speak of it. The war brigades had built these tunnels during the Cold War, supposedly for storage, command sheltering, or weapons testing. That is what the surface level plaques claimed. But the maps we had been given made no sense. Corridors doubled back into themselves. Doorways vanished behind us. What should have been a square hallway opened instead into a stairwell that went down 5 flights before vanishing into shadow. The walls were concrete, but sometimes they pulsed like something inside was breathing. Not fast, just slow enough to question your own heartbeat. We passed a room filled with metal folding chairs, hundreds of them, all facing the same wall. Not a screen, not a stage, just the bare concrete wall, stained with what looked like rust but might have been older than rust. In each chair sat a mannequin, but they were not plastic. They were carved from something organic. Bone. Like, some still had human teeth. We did not enter that room. Later, Marcus said he saw one of them twitch. I believe him. At some point, the tunnel split into 2 paths. We had no markers, no signs, just a choice of left, or right. I chose right. That was the mistake. After 10 minutes, we noticed the change. The lights overhead were not flickering anymore. They were breathing. Steady pulses of illumination. A rhythm. It matched something. My own lungs. My heart. The memory of something ancient. Marcus tried to turn back, but the hallway behind us was gone. Not caved in. Not collapsed. Gone. Just the tunnel ahead breathing like a lung, and the faint echo of something dragging itself across concrete far below us. When we reached the door at the end, we knew we had gone too far. It was made of metal, covered in symbols neither of us could read. Not letters, not runes, just lines that looked too familiar, like something from a dream you forgot on purpose. I touched it. The metal was warm. When I opened it, I understood. It was not a room, not really, just a space, an absence carved into the world. Inside stood a figure. Not human, not machine, a man's shape made of absence, like a black hole shaped to walk upright. There were no eyes, but it looked at us, and we knew. We were not meant to be there. It had been watching for a long time. Waiting. Not for us, not exactly, just for the right crack to open wide enough. Marcus ran. I stayed. The door closed behind me without a sound. It is still in that room. It is always in that room. The corridors around it move when you are not looking, because the structure obeys something older than architecture. I write this from a journal I found in one of the older control rooms, scratched in handwriting I now realize is my own. But aged by decades, it says one thing over and over. You are behind yourself. And I know what it means now. The tunnel never led forward, it led inward. He writing in the journal did not stop at that one phrase. Beneath the repeated lines, you are behind yourself, scrawled over and over in increasingly erratic penmanship, were diagrams. Not technical, not scientific, more like impressions. One looked like a top-down blueprint of the tunnel system, except it looped and curled in on itself, forming an impossible figure, a kind of recursive knot. Another looked like a body, bisected, with something black embedded in its core. The final page was just a black smear, with fingernail scratches through the ink, as if someone had tried to scrape the dark out of the paper. That was when I noticed something strange. The date at the top of the journal. It was 28 years in the future, and the name written on the inside cover, mine. I dropped it. The corridor was silent. Still, but when I turned around, the hallway had shortened. What had been a stretch of over 40 feet was now barely 4. The walls seemed to lean inward, pulsing softly, breathing with me. I heard footsteps. Not ahead, not behind. From beside me, through the wall. They paced for a moment, then stopped exactly where my ear pressed against the concrete. I held my breath. A whisper came low and closer. You never left. I ran. The air grew colder with each step, the floor sloping downward, though I could no longer feel a sense of descent. There were no corners now, only curves, smooth transitions between passageways that never repeated. The walls became more organic, mottled and veined like petrified skin. I passed a window. There should not have been a window. We were miles underground. But beyond the glass was not rock or soil. It was space. Vast, black, and deep. Stars floated by, but too slow and too deliberate, not drifting but watching. I saw one blink. Then another. I was being observed. I turned a corner and entered a room I had already passed, but it had changed. The mannequins were gone. In their place were people. Faces I knew. Marcus, the girl from the church kitchen, my childhood neighbor. All seated, all unmoving, all staring at the same wall. Their eyes were wet, not with tears, but with black fluid. It dripped onto their clothes, staining them with spiral patterns. I did not stay. I reached what looked like an old operations hub. Banks of computers long dead. Screens burned with after images of geometric diagrams and old-time stamped footage. But in the center of the room was a mirror. Tall. Seamless. When I looked in, I did not see myself. Not exactly. I saw a version of myself behind me just out of sync. It turned its head when I did, but slightly slower. Its mouth moved when mine stayed still. It raised a hand and placed it on the glass, and when I did not follow, it smiled. And I remembered something, or was made to remember. I had been here before. But I had not entered. I had been a boy, standing on the cliffside near the church, when the ground had cracked, when my friend had fallen, when I saw something black coiled beneath the earth, like a man but deeper than shadow, the same shape that stood behind the glass. I stumbled backward. The mirror cracked. From the fracture spilled not shards, but voices. Dozens. Hundreds. All speaking at once, but whispering. You are not a visitor. You are the continuation. A you brought it back with you. You are the carrier. My skin burned. A sensation, familiar, awful, repelled up my spine. The particle. The thing I thought I had left behind in orbit, the cosmic speck that entered me when I examined the core sample from the old Russian capsule years ago, had never left. It had waited. It was growing. My memories rippled. I saw myself leaving the cliff, entering the church, watching the girl cook, feeling that strange pulse behind the door where the pastor never answered. None of it in order. None of it separate. The tunnels were not tunnels. They were corridors of recollection. Neural paths. The entire underground facility was a model of my mind, built by something that had hollowed me out and was living in the empty. The entity had no name. Not as we understand names. It was a thought form. A signal cast from deep space, not in waves or frequencies, but intent. It had not arrived. It had awakened, triggered by proximity to a vessel. Me, filled with the right kind of memory. It does not feed on flesh. It feeds on presence, existence itself. It loops you, distorts you, unravels you, and plants seeds of itself in the echo. You leave something behind. I reached the final chamber, not a room, but walls like bone, lights like pulsating stars. In its center stood the man-shaped shadow, not moving, not breathing, just watching. I approached, compelled not by choice but by conclusion. I understood then this was not a story about exploration, it was about recursion. I reached out, and so did he. And our hands touched, and I should have screamed, I should have pulled away. But when our hands met through the center of that unlit void, there was no pain, only quiet, the kind that comes not from absence, but from fulfillment, like a room that finally hears the echo it has waited its whole life to catch. The hand was not cold, not warm, had no texture, no pressure. It was mine, and in that instant a cascade of knowing opened in me. I saw all the times I had nearly touched the moment, walking past the locked door in the church, where the pastor never answered, standing at the cliff with my friend before the earth split and memory ruptured, the girl in the kitchen, humming something too familiar, a melody that only existed in dreams, and only after this point. That was her loop, her part of the story, a fragment given flesh. This was not a haunting, this was habitation. The tunnels were not tunnels, they were arteries. Memory was no longer memory, it was architecture. The creature, if it could be called that, was not hunting, it was fitting, settling into the shape of me. It had not come from the stars, it had come through them, slipping between the folds of physics, looking for something to wear, a shape that remembered it, a mind complex enough to sculpt reality around it, like coral growing around a sunken bone. I was the bone, and it had grown. When the black figure smiled, I saw stars erupt behind its teeth. I saw all of us, not people but echoes, lives repeat across strands of warped chronology, each loop a test, each loop a tunnel, each tunnel lined with the roots of this thing. A cosmic filament, growing across timelines, spiraling tighter with each iteration. Some of us never returned new. Some of us, like me, saw it. Still could do nothing. The figure moved. No steps, just was now closer. Its shape swallowed light. It had no eyes, but I could feel it studying me from behind my own face. And then it whispered. No mouth. No sound. Just the thought, imposed with the weight of gravity itself. You were the door. I staggered, felt my spine crack, not physically but conceptually, like my past was splitting into separate selves. The girl cooking, humming. The journal I wrote decades from now, buried in a concrete war room that had never been built. My friend falling, screaming my name as he clung to dying weeds, and the ground gave way not from erosion, but hollowing. The cliffside was a shell, the church was a lens, and the tunnels were the roots of this. I dropped to my knees. My vision flickered like failing film. Moments looped, the same seconds stretching and reshaping over and over, like kneading dough made of time. I reached into my pocket, and the journal was there. I opened it. There were no words anymore, only a symbol, swirling hand scratched so deep it almost tore through the paper. The same symbol I had seen beneath the glass floor in the ocean. The same symbol etched behind the pulpit in the old church wall. The same symbol that now I realized had always been behind my eyelids when I blinked. I stood. The figure had receded. The walls pulsed once more. The tunnels were collapsing, or I was, or both. My body did not move, but I did, like myself, peeled away from my meat and stepped forward without me. I turned around, and saw myself standing at the entrance to the war tunnel. Young, confused, journal in hand, a flickering light bulb overhead, and I said, though I did not mean to say it, "You were behind yourself." I watched as he... I staggered back, and I smiled, and I understood. The entity never invades, it waits, for the loop, for the right echo to ripple into the right shape. A story read, a memory and tunnel retraced. Now I am inside the walls, not dead, not alive, just inhabited. So if you find this page, if you hear a whisper in the concrete, or see something too black standing too still, or walk through a door you do not remember opening, do not panic. It is not hunting you. It is growing into you. And if you run, you will only find yourself waiting. Wait behind the next turn, smiling. The smell changed first. It was not rot or mold like one might expect in ancient underground corridors. It was something sterile and dry, like dust scorched under heat, as if the walls had been exposed to temperatures no human could survive. The deeper we went, the more the stone seemed to shimmer. Not wet, not reflective, just wrong, like it held some memory of movement. And the silence became layered. It was no longer quiet. It was thick, like you could hear the weight of time settling on your skin. I glanced back and saw the entrance behind us, or what I thought was the entrance. It now curved slightly left, then right, like it did not want to remember the way we came. The tunnels had started to forget their own shape. Jacob had gone quiet. His flashlight beam trembled more than it should have. I asked if he was all right, and he simply said, no one ever left. I asked him what he meant. He just blinked at me. Not confusion, not fear, just a void where language had lived before. That was when the walls started breathing. They did not rise and fall, not like a chest, but they pulsed subtly like muscle. Not stone anymore. Something else. Something warmer. The metal fixtures embedded along the walls, old piping, handles, rusted valves, they were part of it too, twitching sometimes as if stirred from sleep. We passed an old military ration tin embedded in the wall like it had grown there. That was when I noticed the dates. Stamped into the metal was the year 1969. The same date appeared again on a partially buried crate. And again, 1969, repeated, burned, carved, as if the tunnels had been sealed in that moment and looped inside themselves endlessly. At the next bend, the hallway ended in a hatch. It had no handle, no hinges, just a seam in the metal, pulsing faintly like the veins of some gigantic thing, and it whispered, not with voice, with memory. I do not know how to explain that, but I remembered things I had never lived. I remembered being born underground. I remembered building this place with tools I had never touched. I remembered crawling through these tunnels with limbs too long and too wrong for anything that walked above. Jacob stepped toward the hatch. "Do you want us to finish it?" he said. And then the hatch opened inward with no sound. Beyond it was not a room. It was a cavern vast and wrong. It was shaped like a rib cage. That was the only word I could think of. Not carved by hands or machine. Ground. Inside it, floating slightly above the black glass floor, was the entity. It was shaped like a man, but not a man. Its form was humanoid only in outline. Inside it, stars twisted in patterns that defied known constellations. Galaxies spun behind its ribs. Its face was not a face, just a perfect void, a blackness darker than shadow. When it moved, it left afterimages that screamed without sound. We did not run. We could not. It was not that we were paralyzed. It was that we had been waiting for it. Not in this life, perhaps, but some version of us, some memory. We were echoes stepping into alignment. The entity reached toward Jacob.
Not fast, not threatening.
Like a father reaching for a child. Jacob stepped forward and was gone. No scream, no flash, no body just gone, and I understood then. It had no malice, no hunger. It was not a predator. It was a collector. It harvested echoes across time, those lost in loops and forgotten tunnels and failing memories. It had always been here. It is not a monster. It is memory. I do not know how long I stayed. I know I left eventually, or something did. Something with my shape. But I think I am still down there. I think the real me is still remembering the tunnels. And if you ever feel a hallway shift behind you, or see a wall breathe in a place where no wind exists, do not turn around. Because if you do, you might remember that you were there too. You might remember what it means to be forgotten. And then the tunnels will remember you back. I do not know how long I stayed. I know I left eventually, or something wearing my face left. But the part of me that truly belongs to this world, the part anchored in waking life, feels thinner, stretched, like a shadow unraveling at the edges. Sometimes when I close my eyes I hear the walls breathing again. Not outside, but inside my skull. The pulse of those tunnels echoing in the hollow places no one else can see. And the black void, the entity, it is not waiting for me somewhere down there. It is already inside. I see it in reflections that do not show my eyes. I hear it in whispers carried on the wind when no one else is near. I feel its gaze from the space behind my own. It is patient. It does not need to rush, because it knows time is a loop, and the tunnels never truly let anyone go. If you ever hear a corridor breathe, or find yourself watching a shadow that moves without a source, do not look back. You may think it is just your mind playing tricks, but it is not. It is remembering, and soon, so will you.